Hello and welcome to Quiet Hours, a place where the world slows down and mysterious stories fill the silence of the night. Before we begin, make sure you're comfortable and ready to relax. And if you enjoy these relaxing horror stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Now, let the quiet take over and the story begin. This happened at the end of May, about a week before our move upstate to New York. School had finished early, so I was thrilled to have an extra long summer break and, even better, my own room for the first time. Our tiny apartment was more crowded than ever now that my mom's new husband, Frank, had moved in with his daughter, Valerie. That's why my parents bought a big house upstate, and I was looking forward to a fresh start with new friends and more space. I already had a friend upstate named Nikki, who lives just 3 houses away from our new place. We met when my family went to see the house. Nikki goes to the same school, and since it's a small neighborhood, I already felt like I'd have a friend there. That evening, I was sitting on the couch, imagining the great summer ahead. Then, I learned that my great-aunt had passed away. While I wasn't very close to her, my mom was, so our family decided to go to her funeral in my mom's hometown in Connecticut. The journey from Maine to Connecticut, then back to Maine, and finally to New York felt endless. We drove through the night, and I was the only one awake, staring out into the dark as we passed forests and fields. Suddenly, I noticed something in the middle of the road. It was glowing. As we got closer, I realized it was a dog, a Labrador with a soft blue glow surrounding it. Just as I recognized it, our car drove right through it. I looked back, but there was nothing. The dog had vanished. A couple of minutes later, my stepdad pulled over. When I asked him what was wrong, he simply said he thought he'd seen something in the road, but now it was gone. I didn't mention the dog for the rest of the drive. We finally arrived at my mom's hometown early in the morning. Exhausted, Valerie and I slept until about 9. That day, I met a girl who lived next door to my mom's childhood home. A little younger than me, but way more adventurous. That night, in keeping with my mom's Polish traditions, the whole family gathered at my great-aunt's house to pray. My new friend and I decided to take a midnight walk to get some fresh air. As we passed my great-aunt's house, I suddenly saw the glowing dog again. This time, it was right in front of us, growling. I shouted, "Run!" and started dashing back down the road. But when I looked back, the dog was gone, and my friend stood there, staring at me like I was imagining things. She asked, "Mandy, what are you talking about?" All I could see was the dark road, the faint light from my great-aunt's house, and her confused expression. My mom, who'd come out to see what was going on, told me to go home and get some rest. Back at my mom's old house, I saw the living room light on, meaning Valerie had already returned. We both headed to bed, but I couldn't fall asleep, replaying the image of that glowing dog over and over in my mind. I was sure it was some kind of ghost. The next morning, we all prepared for the funeral. We walked slowly to the cemetery, joined by a small crowd of family members trailing behind us. Just as they lowered my great-aunt's coffin into the ground, I felt something at my feet. I looked down and saw the glowing dog once more, sitting quietly by me. This time, though, I felt a strange sense of peace instead of fear. Somehow, it made me feel happy, though I couldn't say why. 3 days after the funeral, we moved to our new house upstate. It's a great place, and I was settling in nicely. But one evening, while looking out into the backyard, I saw it again, the glowing Labrador, just watching me from a distance. I haven't seen it since, but I still wonder why it followed me and what it really wanted. As a little girl growing up in the 1970s, I had a pet guinea pig. My 2 sisters and I each had one, and we adored these little creatures. Sadly, my guinea pig got sick and passed away, leaving me heartbroken. My dad found a shoebox, and together we decorated it, placed my beloved pet inside, and even held a small funeral in the backyard. Dad made a little cross for the grave, and after everyone else had gone inside, I stayed behind, gazing at the freshly dug mound, tears streaming down my face. Then something unbelievable happened. Right where my guinea pig was buried, a shape suddenly emerged from the ground and darted toward the woods, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I was stunned, rooted to the spot, unsure if what I'd seen was real. The figure had the shape of my guinea pig, yet part of it looked transparent, almost gelatinous, as if it were both solid and ethereal at once. I even saw a small sprout near the grave sway as the figure passed by, which only confirmed what I'd seen. My heart pounded as I tried to process it. Growing up Catholic, I'd been taught that animals don't have souls, but in that moment, I knew that couldn't be true. This experience felt profoundly real and would stay with me for the rest of my life. The first person I told was my younger sister, but she just told me to stop lying. I tried my best to convince her, but even to this day, I don't think she believes me. Later that afternoon, while my dad was mowing the lawn, he noticed I was still upset and turned off the mower to see how I was doing. Nervously, I told him what I'd seen. Much to my surprise, he believed me. Then he shared a story of his own. When my dad was a boy growing up in southern Connecticut, this would have been in the 1950s, he and his older brother often camped out in a makeshift tent in their backyard. The area was very rural then, with only their house on a hill, built by my grandfather, standing among the trees. One summer night, while they were out in that tent, really just a large blanket draped over a rope, a bright light appeared outside. My dad woke up, rubbed his eyes, and peeked out. Standing there, bathed in light, was an old man in flowing robes, with a long white beard and a staff in hand. Dad said he was frozen in fear as the man stood silently, simply watching him. Gathering his courage, Dad scrambled back under his blanket, trying to wake his brother, but his brother wouldn't stir. He buried himself under the covers and kept his eyes shut, willing the figure to disappear. In the morning, he told his brother and parents what he'd seen, but no one believed him. Yet, even now, in his late 70s, he swears it happened, and I believe him. I've always wondered who or what that entity was. Was it a guardian of some kind? Perhaps even an angel? The robes and staff certainly seem otherworldly, almost biblical, especially for a rural area in Connecticut. Now, as my dad faces his final months, I can't help but think back to that experience he shared with me. I like to imagine that the spirit he saw all those years ago was a guardian, perhaps waiting to guide him to the other side when his time comes. One morning, my youngest brother came into my room and asked if I'd gone into his room the night before. Half asleep and annoyed, I told him no, reminding him I hadn't even gotten home until 4 a.m. after my bartending shift and went straight to bed. He seemed unconvinced, but I shrugged it off and told him to leave. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the best of me, so I asked him why he thought I'd been in his room. Took some coaxing, but eventually he shared what had happened. And as other family members began to chime in with similar strange experiences, he finally opened up completely. He told me he'd been asleep and woke up to the sensation of someone sitting on top of him, pinning him down. He kept his eyes shut, pretending to sleep while he braced himself to fight off what he thought might be an intruder. As the weight pressed down on him, he also felt the covers being pulled back. Then, just as he was about to react, he heard a voice, my voice, whispering in his ear, "Do you have any weed?" Instantly, he relaxed, thinking it was just me, and rolled over, going right back to sleep. When I reminded him I hadn't been home, he stared at me, finally believing something unexplainable had happened. The realization was unsettling. From the moment we moved into this house, I'd had an underlying sense of unease. It surprised me because I'd felt relieved knowing the house was built in the 70s with no recorded deaths. But it didn't take long for the unsettling events to begin. One day, I was sitting at the computer downstairs, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like an old man walk out of the bathroom, cross the room to my left, and head toward the staircase. I turned, but he was gone. My sister later had a similar experience. She was lying on the couch in that same room and saw me come out of the bathroom and head toward the stairs. She called my name, and as I walked up the stairs, I briefly turned to look at her before continuing out of sight. She thought I was ignoring her, until she realized I wasn't even home. I was 300 miles away in upstate New York. She was terrified. My mom, who's hard of hearing, has often burst into my room in a panic, convinced she heard me screaming for help, only to find me quietly reading or working on some art. Once, while reading late at night, I heard a creepy voice right in my ear scream, "Help me!" I froze, looked around, but no one was there. Another night, I walked into the kitchen and was overwhelmed with the sensation that someone else was there, standing by the fridge. I knew they were there, yet with all the lights on, no one was visible. My youngest brother often sees shadows moving when he walks down the stairs, while my mom frequently catches glimpses of them from her seat in the kitchen. My sister suffered from insomnia when she lived here, telling me later it was because she always felt like something was watching her. These experiences kept building. One summer, I even reached out to a local paranormal group, detailing everything in a message. They were ready to come over right away, but after talking it over, my family and I decided that while the events were frightening in the moment, we didn't feel the presence meant us any harm. So, I didn't follow up with the paranormal team. What I can't shake is the unsettling pattern of sightings. My sister saw me, my brother heard me, and my mother is constantly convinced she hears me calling for help. I wonder, am I somehow haunting my own house? My middle brother and dad claim they haven't experienced anything unusual, but my mom, sister, youngest brother, and I have felt it all, and then some. Comes and goes, always unexplained and never quite making sense. I live in a small village called Northfield, part of the town of Litchfield. Northfield is soaked in history. The old Northfield knife shop once thrived here, and its remains are actually in my backyard. Most of the houses along Main Street, including mine, were once owned by the knife company, so the town has deep ties to its past, dating back to colonial times. Many houses in town have plaques marking who built them and when, adding to the village's historic charm. My first story happened at my landlord's house, where he lives on the other side of town. Though he built it with his father, it's still an eerie place. Upstairs, there are 2 bedrooms, but only one is in use. My cousin stays there. The other is like a preserved relic from the 60s or 70s. My landlord keeps it meticulously clean, but doesn't allow anyone to sleep in it. I've only been in that room once, and I swear, the temperature dropped by 10 degrees as soon as I stepped inside. I started shivering and quickly left, following my cousin out. I haven't been upstairs there since, and I have no intention of going back. Now, on to the truly terrifying experience. Years ago, my aunt bought a house in town that had previously been a thrift store. It was mostly one level, though you had to step up to reach the living room and 2 of the bedrooms. My aunt lived there with her 3 daughters, Jenny, Sasha, and Rachel. Growing up, Rachel, the youngest, was my best friend. We were close in age and often had sleepovers, either at her place or mine. On this particular night, I was sleeping over with Rachel. The living room was right inside the front door, with an open view of the kitchen and foyer. A step-up led into the office, which sometimes doubled as the living room. The office wall opposite the step-up was covered by a huge mirror that reflected all the way down the hallway into the master bedroom. Rachel and I decided to sleep on the couch that night to avoid fighting over her bed. She took one recliner, and I took the other, facing away from the front door because I hate not being able to see the entrance. The only light was from the wood-burning stove, casting flickering shadows across the room. I was lying on my right side, staring into the mirror, trying to fall asleep when I saw it. A large, dark figure standing in the archway, watching us. Rachel was already sound asleep, and I was paralyzed with fear. I watched, unable to move, as the figure slowly moved down the hallway, past the foyer, and out the back door. I didn't sleep at all that night. A few weeks later, Sasha's birthday was coming up, and when my parents asked her what she wanted, she had one request at the top of her list: a Ouija board. They bought it for her, and one night soon after, she decided to use it. I refused to join in, but my cousins Destiny and PJ, who were visiting, and my older sister joined Sasha to test it out. They laughed off the answers they got, accusing Destiny of messing with the board, even though it claimed to be the spirit of our deceased grandmother. That made things even more unsettling. Afterward, they turned off all the lights in the house to play hide and seek in the dark. PJ was it and started looking for the others, wandering through the house in the pitch black. When he reached the office, he saw a small, dark figure crouched inside a dog cage and assumed it was Destiny or Rachel. He reached inside, and the figure vanished instantly. He insists the cage felt colder than the rest of the house, and he's never forgotten it. A few months later, Sasha was sitting alone in the living room, painting her nails, when something suddenly flew across the room. It missed her head by inches, slammed into the mirror, and fell to the floor. When she looked, she saw it was a battery from the other side of the house. The activity in the house picked up after that. Every room carried the feeling of being watched, and I could barely stand to go there, even in daylight. The house radiated an unwelcoming, oppressive presence, and it was almost as if someone or something was screaming at me to get out whenever I stepped inside. I'm convinced they opened a portal with the Ouija board, unleashing something that grew stronger over time. Ironically, years later, Sasha ended up moving into that same house with her husband and baby. We've drifted apart since our grandfather passed, so I don't know if she's experienced anything else there. But I can say that whatever presence haunts that house was the most menacing and intense I've ever felt. Even now, just stepping onto the property fills me with an unsettling sense of dread. In 1990 to 1991, I worked as the superintendent of an apartment complex in Rockville, Connecticut. The complex was actually 3 buildings of different ages squeezed onto what had once been the grand yard of a stately 1877 mansion. My own apartment was in this mansion, in what had originally been the drawing rooms and kitchen. 3 large, beautiful spaces filled with remnants of the house's former glory: brass ceilings, pressed leather wall coverings, stained glass windows, and enormous, working fireplaces. Rockville's textile boom was long past, and while the mansion was now neglected and plagued by endless repairs, field mice, and occasional vandalism, it was hard to complain about free rent. The mansion had been divided into 3 apartments and 2 long vacant basement offices. I shared the ground floor with a large studio apartment, while the second and third floors formed a massive 5-bedroom unit that college students rented. There was no soundproofing, but we were young and got used to each other's noise. By the spring of 1991, the college students moved out, tired of the complex's abysmal parking and the collapsing carriage house that forced us all to play musical cars. Once they were gone, I rekeyed the locks and went upstairs to assess the damage. True to form, they'd left behind abandoned furniture, expired food, and plenty of garbage. As I worked, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling of being watched. Oddly, even on those scorching June days, I felt a chill that clung to the air, despite the sweat dripping off of me. A few nights later, I was in bed when I heard loud footsteps echoing down the main hallway, moving from the front of the house toward the back. For a moment, I thought it was just my neighbors, until I remembered the apartment was empty. Grabbing my flashlight and a hammer, I let myself in, hoping it was just local kids and nothing worse. Putting on my best Sylvester Stallone impersonation, I yelled and threatened as I went room to room, the flashlight casting eerie shadows that occasionally made my own reflection appear in the foggy antique windows, startling me more than once. But there was no one there, and the only entryway at street level, the front door, was locked and bolted. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, or mistaken my next-door neighbor's noise for footsteps upstairs. But as the summer wore on, I continued to hear those footsteps. They came at different times, sometimes in broad daylight, other times in the middle of the night, waking me from sleep. They always moved from the front of the house to the back, the steady clack of what sounded unmistakably like dress shoes or boots echoing down the hallway. With no other explanation, I resigned myself to the idea of a ghost, and as long as it stayed in the empty apartment, I could live with it. The property went into foreclosure that fall, and everyone moved out not long after. There were a few more things that added to the overall creepiness. One night, while chatting with my next-door neighbors, they asked why I was wandering around upstairs at odd hours. When I explained what I'd been experiencing, they told me they'd heard the footsteps too, continuing down the hall over their part of the ground floor and into the upstairs bedroom where they claimed they heard a door slam. The problem was, there was no door to slam in that room or anywhere else. I'd removed the doors and taken them down to the basement to refinish, but with the financial collapse, that project never got finished. The strangest discovery happened a year later, after I'd moved and was back to hearing only earthly noises in my new place. At the library one day, I noticed an exhibit of antique photos of Rockville, including a photo of the house where I'd lived. Curious, I asked the librarian if there was any literature on it. She directed me to a computer archive recently compiled by the Historical Society. It was 1992. So we're talking DOS prompt and green screen. I learned that from the 1930s through the 1950s, the house had been a funeral parlor. This explained the large porcelain table in the basement that I'd kept my tools on. Though it wasn't confirmed, it likely meant that the grand rooms in my apartment had served as viewing rooms for nearly 20 years. The house still stands today, looking as if the current owners have invested some time and capital into restoring it. Whether anyone still haunts the upstairs hallway, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if that mysterious visitor is still there. My grandmother knew almost nothing about her heritage, or my grandfather's for that matter. So, hoping to learn more, she offered to pay for me to join Ancestry.com to start piecing together our family history. Her side of the family wasn't too difficult to trace, but my grandfather's side was more challenging. It had connections to the Kellogg family, but with the little information she knew, I didn't have many leads. After hours of deep dives and cross-references, I finally made some headway with a few distant relatives and eventually discovered that my many great-grandmother's first name was actually her middle name. This breakthrough came from a book I found about a nearby town, which helped me piece together more of her story. In my search, I often went to local cemeteries to find headstones of nearby family members, but I couldn't find hers anywhere. Eventually, I realized she didn't have a headstone at all. This discovery launched me into an entirely new quest, locating her exact burial plot to place a marker there. I'm still working on it, but tracking down the caretaker has been a frustrating, ongoing process. A few days after one of our cemetery visits, I had an experience I'll never forget. I woke up in the middle of the night to an incredibly vivid image of a young woman at the end of my bed. She was transparent but distinct, dressed in clothing from the 1800s. The right era, I thought, given what I'd learned about my great-grandmother. She was smiling at me as she stood up and then vanished just as quickly. It was a brief, quiet encounter, but I felt it was her way of thanking me for caring. Her husband had remarried after she passed away and never put up a headstone. I believe my mother, sister, and I might be the first family members to actually look for her grave and try to mark it. Her presence felt warm and peaceful, and though I've had paranormal experiences that left me shaken, this one brought a sense of comfort. I often think she might be one of my guardian angels now. Now, about the painting. I'm an artist, and in 2016, while I was living with my grandmother to help care for her during her battle with ovarian cancer, I painted something special for her. It was a simple painting of a tree with a cancer ribbon woven into its branches and the word hope written along the ribbon. It wasn't anything elaborate, but I made it to remind her that there was still hope. She'd been struggling with deep sadness since my grandfather passed in 2010, so I wanted her to feel some encouragement. In April 2017, my grandmother passed away due to complications from chemotherapy. I stayed on at her house until October to take care of her animals and keep up with the property. By then, the painting hung over the narrow stairway from the ground floor to the second floor. For her funeral, my mom's cousins came up from Florida, as they had been very close to my grandmother. 2 of them stayed in her bedroom, and another slept in the guest room, which had become mine. I took an air mattress in the living room. Our family has a unique way of grieving. Rather than sinking into sadness, we tend to reminisce, make jokes, and celebrate the funny, even embarrassing memories we have of our loved ones. That night, we gathered at my brother's place around a huge bonfire, sharing stories about my grandmother. We joked about things she'd done that would have made her blush, and, knowing her, she would have given us a scolding if she'd heard. When we got back to her house later that night, we found my painting of the tree and ribbon lying in the middle of the kitchen floor, a good 6 feet from the staircase wall where it had been hanging. None of us had any explanation. The nail was still firmly in the wall at an angle so steep I had trouble getting it out later when we cleared the house. My cousins quickly said goodnight and scattered to their rooms, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the fallen painting. I hung it back up, and it hasn't moved or fallen since. I'm pretty sure that was my grandmother letting us know she'd heard everything and wasn't pleased with our jokes. She was a spitfire in life, so it was comforting to know that hadn't changed after she passed. Now, that painting hangs on my bedroom wall, secure and steady. It's a little reminder that, even though she's gone, she's still around, keeping us in line. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. On March 12, 2016, I experienced something beyond explanation. I don't consider myself a paranormal enthusiast, nor do I claim to have any special abilities. I've never been diagnosed with anxiety or any other disorder, and I'm not on any medication. I'm simply a Connecticut resident and a golf professional who had recently returned from a 14-month stint in Florida for work. I'd come back to start a new position in Sherman, Connecticut, as a director of golf. Without an apartment lined up, I arranged for an extended stay at a local inn in Brookfield. The room was more than adequate. 2 queen beds, a dresser, a desk, a flat-screen TV, and a full bath. I settled in and made myself at home, taking the bed nearest the wall. I plugged a small night light into an outlet near the foot of the bed to help me navigate in the dark, as I don't need total darkness to sleep. A week after my arrival, I settled in for the night around 10 p.m. As I closed my eyes, I noticed a square-shaped object floating behind my eyelids, following every movement of my eyes. It was a distinct, colorful shape, almost like the Microsoft logo, divided into small red, blue, green, and white squares. I assumed it was just a lingering effect from the bathroom light. After a few minutes of shifting around, the shape faded, and I drifted off to sleep, not giving it another thought. The next night, I went to bed around the same time. Sometime later, at exactly 2:45 a.m., I woke suddenly, not from a sound but from an inexplicable awareness. I lay on my back, eyes open, and there, between the bed and the wall, a ghostly figure rose from the floor. Translucent yet colorful, he looked startlingly familiar, like a former colleague, Bill, whom I'd known years ago. He had red hair, fair skin, and appeared to be in his 40s, with a calm expression that oddly put me at ease. He pointed to the wall at the foot of my bed as if urging me to look. Trying to keep my composure, I whispered, "Bill, if that's you, go back to where you came from." With a playful, mock-sad look, he sank back into the floor. Shaken, I switched on the light and called the front desk. The night clerk said she believed in spirits and that it sounded like the ghost was trying to show me something. I hung up, unsure whether to stay or leave. It was 20 degrees outside, and I had nowhere else to go, so I stayed. Reassured, I lay back down, calling out, "Billy, if that's you, come back." Nothing happened, and I began to wonder if I just imagined it all. I rolled onto my side and tried to fall asleep again. Moments later, I felt 3 taps on my thigh. I bolted upright, gasping, and there he was again, this time standing beside the bed, pointing at the wall. Though I'd always thought ghosts couldn't physically touch you, his calm, friendly demeanor kept me from panicking. But it was clear he had something to show me. I lay back down, trying to convince myself it was a dream, until I sensed the room get darker. Opening my eyes, I realized the nightlight was out. I got up, assuming it had burned out, but found it sitting on the dresser across the room. Now, fully convinced that something otherworldly was happening, I climbed back into bed, half resigned to whatever was about to unfold. Soon, my ghostly visitor returned, appearing between the beds, now working out on a gym machine. Dressed in a red tank top, white shorts, and a sweatband, he flexed his muscles, smiling at me as if to say he was getting ready for something. As I watched, his message began to make sense. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. In the darkness, a translucent Asian woman, appearing in her 60s, knelt beside me, quietly asking permission to sit close. I said, "Sure," and gave her a thumbs up, but she seemed to misunderstand, her face falling as if I'd offended her. I tried to explain, but she moved away. Another woman, who felt like her daughter, appeared and told me, "You cannot do that to us." I explained the misunderstanding, and the elder woman returned, still hesitant but calmer. The encounters continued. 2 male ghosts appeared, standing beside my bed, looking similar, perhaps brothers, each wearing plastic-framed glasses. These two had a menacing vibe and began mocking me with crude gestures. I kept my composure, smiling and nodding, hoping to defuse their intimidation. Soon, they faded back into the darkness. Two more female ghosts then emerged, dressed as circus clowns, momentarily transforming the room into a circus-like scene. They, too, left, giving way to quieter, faint whispers in the dark. My original ghost returned, and the wall at the foot of the bed became a slideshow of images. Tropical beaches, scenic places, and even golf courses. I realized he was showing me where they were going. A new ghost appeared, a friendly woman in her 50s with red-framed glasses, holding a small pillow with a pair of glasses on it. She wanted me to wear them, as if to help me see the slideshow more clearly. As the slideshow continued, the images grew darker, shifting to graveyards. Two male ghosts dressed as police officers appeared on the darker side of the room, pushing a jail cell toward me, urging me to get in. Unnerved, I stood up, and they vanished. When I lay back down, my bed transformed into a horse-drawn hearse with a view of a cemetery behind it. The room echoed with chants of, "That's where you'll be someday." Checking my watch, I saw it was 4:30 a.m. Nearly 3 hours had passed since it all began. At 4:45 a.m., my host ghost returned, now dressed in a red and white floral shirt and white slacks, as if ready for a trip. He smiled, shook my hand, and gestured at the wall. Then he left, and other ghosts came to my bedside, each saying goodbye. A teenage girl with glasses and a slightly distorted face kissed me on the cheek, her chaperone gently reminding her that one kiss is enough, as she turned for another. Then came the grand finale. The wall turned into outer space, and I saw Earth spinning far in the distance. Thousands of lights rose from the continents, gathering together in space before speeding away into eternity. I realized that was my gift for this encounter, a final farewell. When I lay back down, two straggling bad ghosts in burglar outfits crept toward me, trying to sneak through the mirror above the desk. Fed up, I shouted, "It's over!" They retreated into the wall. Moments later, another ghost appeared, a tall, thin man, perhaps in his 70s, dressed in 1930s-style clothing. He calmly looked through my things, lifting a blue face cloth as if it were something he'd long missed. Lying across my feet, he wept into it until he, too, vanished, leaving only the memory of his presence. As I finally lay back down, ghostly images of graveyards still floated behind my eyelids. Worried something might be wrong with my vision, I drove to the emergency room, drained and dazed. The doctors were skeptical, testing for drugs or alcohol, but finding nothing. They prescribed anxiety medication, which I tossed as soon as I left. Some friends and I went up to the Great Sand Dunes last month for a birthday/end-of-summer camping trip. It was absolutely beautiful, though it seemed like everyone had the same idea that weekend. The campgrounds at the sand dunes were packed. With the campsites only 10 to 15 feet apart, we decided to look for a quieter place to set up. About a mile or so back, we found the Oasis campgrounds, which were much more secluded. After driving around for a while, we found a spot we liked and started unloading the gear. My boyfriend and I picked a nice, flat area near a tree to set up our tent. We had all new camping equipment since neither of us had been camping in years, so the tent, sleeping bags, and everything else was brand new, right out of the box. After putting up the tent, we laid out a mat in front of it. I stepped away for a moment to grab a rock to hold it down, and when I came back, I noticed the mat had blown a few feet in the wind. As I picked it up, I saw a perfect, dirty footprint on the underside, a bare footprint with a shape that looked distinctly feminine. There were only 3 of us there, and I was the only female. It was chilly, and we all had our shoes on, so none of us had been walking around barefoot. The mat was brand new, too, so it hadn't been stepped on by any of us with or without shoes. My boyfriend, a bit freaked out, tossed the mat in the trunk, and after a while we put it out of our minds. That night, we went to bed and fell asleep quickly. Around 3 a.m., I was woken by the sound of footsteps outside the tent. At first, I thought it was my friend, but the footsteps were too light and quick to be his. My friend is about 6 feet tall and 190 pounds, but these steps sounded smaller, more like a child's or a small animal. I thought it might be a fox, but the sound continued as it circled our tent over and over. Then, the footsteps stopped near my side of the tent, followed by a sound like rocks being rubbed or banged together. I listened for about 15 minutes, then woke my boyfriend to see if he heard it too. He did. The sounds would go in circles around the tent, stopping on either side, with the rocks scratching and banging together. We both lay there, listening, for what felt like an hour. At some point, I started to think that whatever it was didn't mean us any harm, so I tried to get back to sleep. The part that really unsettled me was that, when I sat up to listen, the sound seemed to come from my boyfriend's side of the tent. But as soon as I lay back down, it was directly behind me. My boyfriend later confirmed he experienced the same thing. We couldn't sleep and lay awake listening until the first light of dawn. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound was gone. The next day, we told our friend about it. He said he'd also heard footsteps near his tent, but they only lasted a few seconds. That day, 4 more friends arrived to join us at the campground. My boyfriend and I decided to move our tent to a different spot. Not just because of the previous night, but also because the ground was uncomfortable. One of our other friends set up his tent where ours had been. That night was more of a party atmosphere, and if anything strange happened, we didn't notice. We tried to keep the footprint on the mat, but after it went back in the camping gear, we lost track of it. I didn't have a camera with me, which was a mistake for several reasons, but hindsight is 20/20. What would you call this? Someone suggested the footprint might have been picked up from a previous footprint in the dirt, transferred due to moisture, but I've never heard of that happening. And the mat was just laid on the ground with no pressure on it to pick up a print. Could the sounds have been an animal? But why would it circle the tent for so long? And what was with the scratching and banging? Someone else suggested it might have been a Native American spirit. This story begins with a different event that led up to a very unsettling experience I had. One night, I was staying at a friend's house, not far from where I lived at the time. My friend's dad is a local policeman, and he got home from work around 12:30 a.m. As we talked to him, we mentioned that we'd been hearing strange knocking noises coming from upstairs while we were in the basement. But each time we went up, we found no one in the house. This had happened 3 or 4 times that night, and we were both spooked. His mom was out for a ladies' night event, and his brother was at my house with my brother. When we told his dad about the noises, our first thought was that it could have been our little brothers playing a prank. But when we called my house, they were still playing video games and had been for hours. Plus, the door was locked when his dad got home. I half-jokingly suggested it might be a ghost or spirit, but my friend was adamant that those things weren't real. That's when his dad started telling us a story. Years ago, he and his brother, my friend's uncle, had tried an alternative way of communicating with spirits that didn't involve an Ouija board. They set up candles around the room, turned off all the lights, and placed a pen and small notebook on the coffee table. After saying the Lord's Prayer, they wrote on the paper, asking if any spirits wanted to communicate. Within minutes, my friend's dad said his hand was drawn to the pen, and he wrote the word, yes. This led to a conversation with whatever was in the room, and that's where he ended the story. My friend still didn't believe a word, so we decided to try it in his basement. We set up candles around a glass table, put out chairs, and placed a pen and paper in the center. We sat down, said the Lord's Prayer, and wrote, "Is there anyone here who would like to talk to us?" But the pen just sat there, and neither of us felt anything unusual. My friend tried writing the question again, and then jokingly he said, "Man, this is a hoax. It's all just a big joke." Right then, my hand slammed onto the table, grabbed the pen, and started scribbling over his writing. He was about to laugh it off, but when he looked at me, he froze. He later told me that my face was blank, but my eyes looked intense, almost evil. He spoke up, saying, "Stop, we don't mean any harm." At that moment, I seemed to snap out of it, and I looked at the paper, asking what had happened. When he explained, I felt a surge of fear. But my friend still wasn't convinced, so he wrote on the pad, "If you're here, blow out one of the candles." Instantly, all the candles went out except the one next to the pad. My friend then wrote, "Now light them all again." And just like that, all the candles flared back to life. Somehow, he was still skeptical, so I wrote on the pad, "He doesn't believe. How can you make him believe?" Looking back, it was a foolish thing to do, and the outcome could have been much worse, but thankfully it wasn't. I suddenly felt my hand moving on its own, writing, "Grab the pen and try to remove it from the paper." My friend did, but he couldn't lift it. Frustrated, he yelled, "I don't believe you." At that moment, his hand started moving, and he wrote, "Hold this pen in the air." He lifted the pen, holding it out in front of him, and though he felt resistance, it wasn't too hard, until, suddenly, his hand was yanked downward, pulling him through the glass table. At that point, we'd caused enough commotion to get his dad's attention. He arrived just in time to see what had happened. While I sat there, terrified, his dad grabbed the pen and said the Lord's Prayer, then wrote goodbye on the pad, making both of us write it as well. At the time, I didn't understand why we all had to write goodbye. But looking back, I realized it was to ensure the connection was fully closed. It was one of the scariest and most surreal experiences of my life. Sometimes my friend and I joke about that night, but he admits he'll never again doubt the existence of spirits or the afterlife, even though he hasn't had any encounters since. I'm glad he learned something, but for me, the experience taught an even more profound lesson. Spirits, anomalies, and paranormal entities are real, whether you believe in them or not. The one thing you should never do, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, is to disrespect them. Respect the dead as you would the living, and honor the beyond as you do the here and now. You never know what might happen if you cross the wrong side, or where you might encounter it. About 2.5 or 3 years ago, my boyfriend went through a series of unsettling experiences that still scare me every time I think about them. These events took place over the course of 6 months, starting when he was preparing to move from his apartment into a duplex in an older downtown neighborhood, with homes dating back to the 1950s or earlier. A couple of days before the move, my boyfriend had a vivid dream. He was still in his current apartment, where something was haunting him and his roommate. In the dream, he decided to perform an exorcism to try to drive the spirit out. He was sitting on his bed, meditating, when the ghost of a young girl appeared. She began throwing things at him, yelling, "Get the F*** out of my house!" over and over, as a tall man hovered menacingly behind her. He woke up from the dream shaken and immediately called me. After he and his roommates moved into the duplex, things started off fine, aside from my boyfriend having occasional strange dreams. One day, we were all sitting outside on the porch when the neighbor from the connecting duplex came over and shared a bizarre dream he'd had. To our shock, it sounded eerily similar to the ones my boyfriend was experiencing. The dreams went on for a long time, and soon, odd things started happening. Lights turning on randomly, floorboards creaking when no one was walking on them, and the rocking chair moving on its own. By this point, we were convinced something was in the house, though it didn't seem hostile. But things took a darker turn one night when I was asleep at my own house. I was in that half-asleep state where you can still sense your surroundings, and I felt like someone was in my bedroom. Suddenly, I felt a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, as though someone were sitting on me. I could barely breathe. Then I felt something push my legs down against the bed. Terrified, I finally managed to catch my breath and sit up. I'd never felt fear like that before. When I told my boyfriend, he wondered if it might be connected to the girl and the hovering man in his dream. Soon after, I got a late-night call from him. He'd just gotten home from work and was sitting in his basement room, playing guitar, when he heard a noise in the adjacent room. He tried to ignore it, but then heard footsteps coming from upstairs. Panic-stricken, he grabbed the phone, ran outside, and called me, standing as far from the house as he could while still connected to the landline. Partway through our conversation, he saw a shadowy figure standing on his porch under the light, just staring at the door. He didn't go back inside until his roommate came home hours later. Not long after, I was staying at my dad's house out in the country. That night, I had a vivid dream that was mostly nonsense, except that a girl kept appearing. She had long, bushy brown hair, glasses, and was wearing a puffy 70s-style winter coat. She kept glaring at me, and at one point, I felt someone hovering over me as I slept. Startled, I woke up but quickly went back to sleep, thinking nothing of it. A week later, I mentioned the dream to my boyfriend, describing the girl. He went quiet, staring at me, before telling me she was identical to the girl he'd seen in his first dream. The strange occurrences slowed down for a bit, but about a month later, we threw a party at the house. One of our friends crashed on the couch, but by morning, she was gone. She called later that day to explain that around 4 a.m., she'd heard someone walking around the kitchen for what seemed like forever. She tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but suddenly she heard footsteps running quickly from the kitchen to the living room, stopping right in front of the couch. Without hesitation, she'd grabbed her things and left at 4:30 a.m., in the freezing cold. Only a couple of nights later, my boyfriend had his biggest scare yet. He described it as a lucid, almost hyper-realistic dream. In it, he was trying to get out of the house but was somehow trapped. Something pushed him down, and he was stuck halfway between the basement and the main level, struggling to move as something tried to pull him further down. When he finally woke up, he looked over and saw a bluish, smoky figure, a partial woman's torso, that faded into his books after about 5 seconds. Terrified, he ran upstairs, pounded on his roommate's door, and told him what happened. They were sitting on the couch as he explained the dream when, out of nowhere, the lamp turned on by itself. They ended up sitting on the front porch for the rest of the night, too afraid to go back inside. The next day, my boyfriend was alone in the house and started to feel like something was there with him. Calmly, he told it to leave him and his friends alone. After that, the activity slowed down, but we were all still on edge. One of his roommates, who was Native American, had his father, a medicine man, perform a cleansing on the house, and after that, nothing strange ever happened again. Before all this, I was a bit of a skeptic. Whenever something strange happened, I'd try to think of a logical explanation or brush it off as imagination. But after those 6 months, I became much more aware of the supernatural and a lot more open to believing in it. Life has been good lately. I've been spending a lot of time with my girlfriend, and for a while, I hadn't had any strange experiences. But tonight, all that changed. Around midnight, I thought I heard my mom upstairs messing with the trash, like she was taking it out. I went up to check, but when I got there, she was in bed, and nobody was around. By 12:30, I started getting that weird feeling, like someone else was in the room. My cat was freaked out too, acting anxious, and I kept hearing noises coming from upstairs. I went back down, but almost exactly at 1 a.m., that feeling hit again. Then I heard a cough, saw a shadow on the stairs, and instinctively chased it. Of course, it reached the top before I did. I heard it moving across the kitchen into the family room, and when I looked, it was dark, always as at night. But the deck light was on, and I could see what was probably Jerry standing on the deck, just staring at me. He was almost transparent, a bit blurry, but I could still make him out. As I moved closer, he just sort of faded into the air. Now, I'm sitting here, half waiting for something else to happen, half wondering if anything will. It's been a long time since anything like this happened, so for it to start up again now feels strange. I have no clue why this thing picks certain times to appear, and I doubt it'll ever make sense. I hesitate to call it a ghost because that just sounds too made up, but I don't know how else to describe him. He looks like a man about my height, maybe a bit shorter. He wears a tank top, camo pants, and has almost bald, grayish skin with lifeless eyes. He coughs like a heavy smoker, and sometimes I even hear sneezing, which I don't understand. He brings a lot of strange stuff with him. I'll see weird hallucinations, things that only I seem to notice. Nothing's ever touched me or hurt me. It's just these bizarre things I see. Sometimes, if I'm looking in the mirror, I'll see myself as Jerry, but then I'm back to normal in an instant. Other times, I'll see Jerry standing in front of the mirror, only for him to vanish a second later. Sometimes, it looks like blood is dripping down the walls, but only in the mirror's reflection. Or I'll catch a glimpse of a hand reaching around the corner, usually when I'm on the phone or really tired. When I'm in a sleep paralysis state, he'll look into my room, even nudging the door open a bit. I know it's him because if it were my mom, she'd come in, and she wouldn't be checking on me at 4 o'clock in the morning. Other times, I'll see what look like bodies hanging from the ceiling in the dark part of the basement. At first, they look like bags, but then I realize it's something else, and they disappear just as quickly as they came. Sometimes, a face will randomly appear on the wall, staring at me, blurry, then it vanishes instantly. I've even seen faces on the TV. It'll go to static and then a freakish, deformed face appears, lingering before disappearing, while the static continues for about 10 minutes before returning to normal. Lights will flicker sometimes, even on sunny days. I've also found objects moved, things that I know weren't touched. I'll find things I lost years ago in totally random spots, or I'll notice files missing from my computer. Sometimes, I find my drink half gone, or lights turned on that I know I left off. And sometimes, a door will be open or a fan turned off, even though everything else is working fine. Then there are the weird phone calls. The caller ID will show bizarre numbers that aren't possible, like 666 or just 9, or a sequence like for 3.63.46.54.746.5.745.7. These calls never show up in the call history. If I answer, it's usually static or a strange voice saying something completely random before cutting off. Other times, I'll hear paper rustling or bags being moved around upstairs. Sometimes my computer won't even turn on, as if someone is physically keeping it off. I'll hear footsteps behind me on the stairs, see a shadow moving the opposite way, and when I chase it, nobody's there. If I don't find a way to get rid of this, I'm going to be really ticked off. This has been happening almost my entire life. I'm used to it by now, but that doesn't make it any less disturbing. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I don't even know where to start with this story. It all began after my roommate and I stopped being friends, and I bought my first house. Built in 1954, it had been abandoned from 1979 until around 1991. The moment I saw it, I fell in love with the place. It was small, but it had a charming retro vibe that immediately drew me in. The first odd thing I noticed was the absolute silence in the yard. No birds, no squirrels, not even insects. It was as if the entire place was under some kind of eerie spell. In my first week there, something even stranger happened. I found a can of soup from my kitchen cabinet behind my pillow. I hadn't had any guests, and I couldn't think of any reason I would have put it there. I brushed it off as nothing, but the strangeness didn't end there. A week later, I was sound asleep when, around 2:30 a.m., the doorbell rang 4 times, loud and distinct. I groggily got up and went to the front door, expecting to see some prankster outside, but no one was there. I glanced at the doorbell and felt a chill run up my spine. The button was missing completely, and the whole mechanism looked broken. I tried pressing it just to be sure, but it wouldn't work. This sent a wave of fear through me, and I slept with the light on for the next 2 nights. After a few more months of strange, unexplained events, I invited an old friend, Gary, over to visit. Gary and I had been friends since we were 10, and he'd never shown any interest in the paranormal. It wasn't something that even came up in conversation between us. Before we arrived at my house, we had lunch together, and he was his usual self, talkative, relaxed, and in good spirits. But the moment we walked inside, his whole demeanor changed. He grew pale, his expression darkened, and he became unusually irritable. Small things started setting him off, and he was swearing like he was someone else entirely. Around 8:30 that evening, without a word, Gary just stood up, walked into the guest bedroom, and went straight to bed. It was strange, but I shrugged it off and went to sleep a little while later. Then, at about 1:10 a.m., I woke up to the sound of violent retching. Rushing to the bathroom, I found Gary completely nude, curled up on the floor, mumbling, This place isn't right." He was almost incoherent, his voice laced with fear. I was so alarmed by his state that I called 911, thinking maybe he was on something. The next morning, I went to visit him in the hospital. The doctors hadn't found any cause for his extreme vomiting or the delusions. The EMTs told me he'd started coming back to himself right before they arrived at the hospital. When I asked him what had happened, he told me that from the moment he'd entered my house, he'd felt off, like something was wrong. He described grotesque, disturbing thoughts filling his mind and a heavy, oppressive presence looming over him. He refused to come back to the house after that night. That incident shook me to my core. I stayed in that house for another 6 months, enduring the strange sounds, the unexplained movements of objects, and that constant, unsettling feeling. I'd often find things in places they shouldn't be. A book in the bathroom, a pair of shoes on the kitchen counter. Each incident unsettling in its own way. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I put the house up for sale and moved out within a month. Even now, whenever I drive by that house, I feel a sinking sensation in my gut, a sense of dread that makes me want to keep my distance. The whole experience has left me wondering what truly lurks within those walls. My wife and I had been searching for our dream home for almost a year when, one warm April afternoon, we finally found it. The house was in a small town near Haddam, Connecticut. It was exactly what we'd envisioned. Secluded, miles away from the nearest neighbor, and reachable only by a long, winding dirt road that stretched about 1.5 miles through dense woods. When we arrived at the clearing, there it stood, a grand 3-story, 11-room house that had an almost timeless appeal. It needed some work after years of vacancy, with brown grass, an old, rusty Chrysler in the driveway, and a murky pond at the back, but it had an undeniable charm. We learned that the previous owner had lived there up until 3 years ago when she entered a nursing home. She had passed away only a few months before we bought the house. Her niece, who sold us the property, was heartbroken to let it go after it had been in their family for over 60 years. We moved in 3 weeks later. On that first night, an unsettling silence hung over the place. It was almost too quiet. While my wife cleaned up after dinner, I went outside around 10 p.m. to smoke. Standing there, I heard something moving in the woods. I figured it might be a raccoon or a possum, but an inexplicable sense of unease crept over me, as if something unseen was watching. The feeling lingered, and I quickly headed back inside. Not long after, we decided to call it a night. Just past 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud thud. I sat up, straining to listen. Moments later, I heard a faint dragging sound from above, as if something heavy was being pulled across the third-floor floorboards. My wife was still sound asleep, so I got up and headed toward the stairs. Standing at the base of the steps, I heard the floorboards creaking above. With every step I took, my heartbeat grew faster, my chest tightened, and a deep sense of dread settled over me. When I reached the top of the stairs, I found myself staring down a long, dark hallway. The door to the room at the far end was slightly ajar. I could hear faint whispering. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I froze in place, unable to move or speak, my breath caught in my chest. Then, suddenly, the door flew open, and there, in the doorway, stood a tall figure cloaked in a black hooded robe. My head throbbed with a blinding pain. My heart raced uncontrollably, and everything faded to black. I woke up hours later in the hospital with a fractured skull, 2 broken ribs, and a shattered knee. My wife, who had found me at the bottom of the stairs after hearing the noise, explained that she'd called for help immediately. I recounted what had happened on the 3rd floor, pleading with her not to go back to that room. She looked at me with disbelief and dismissed it all as a product of sleepwalking, a habit I hadn't indulged in for years. After a short stay in the hospital, I reluctantly returned to the house. My wife assured me it was all a nightmare, that I'd simply had an episode of sleepwalking. Eventually, I convinced myself to let it go. Life seemed to settle down. We unpacked and adjusted to the new surroundings. My wife was delighted with the house, even setting up a sewing and reading room on the 3rd floor. She insisted nothing unusual had happened up there, and she urged me to forget about my dream. But over the following weeks, my wife started to change. She grew short-tempered, even verbally abusive, prone to sudden outbursts. It was as if she were a different person. I still heard strange noises around the house and felt an ominous presence. But whenever I brought it up, she'd become furious, shutting down any mention of it. She spent most of her time in that third-floor room and, most nights, even slept there. She grew distant, almost as if in a trance, rarely leaving the house except for long, solitary walks in the woods. Our once loving relationship grew strained. She cut off contact with friends and family and hadn't left the property in months. The only joy she seemed to find was in feeding a stray dog that visited every evening, giving it all her attention while barely acknowledging me. She seemed almost hypnotized by that dog, as if it were her only source of comfort. Now, I rarely come home. Our marriage feels like it's slipping through my fingers, overshadowed by whatever dark presence has taken root in our lives. I spend most nights at a friend's house, uncertain of what will become of us, and haunted by the feeling that whatever lies in that house has already taken her. My name is Clay, and I'm originally from Jacksonville, Florida. When I was 8, my family moved into a condo there, and everything seemed normal at first except for one thing: a Ouija board left behind in the closet of my bedroom. I later found out that the previous owner's wife had been fond of using it, though for reasons unknown, she left it behind when they moved. Once I started school, I'd come home in the afternoons and spend a few hours alone before my older sister and then my mom got back. It wasn't long before I started noticing strange noises from upstairs, like someone pacing around. I call out, saying the names of anyone who could be there, but there was never a response. The noises would stop, only to start again the next day, sometimes louder, sometimes moving from room to room. One day, I heard what sounded like someone running around upstairs, the sound ending with a door slamming shut. But the scariest moment came when the usual pacing noise stopped suddenly, and I heard what sounded like a heavy object, maybe a bowling ball, drop onto the floor. One afternoon, while playing with my little sister, I ran up the stairs, expecting her to follow me. I saw a young girl about her age coming up after me, wearing a blue dress, something you'd see from 100 years ago. I froze when I realized this wasn't my sister. She vanished through the wall, like it was an open hallway. Over time, the noises continued, but I was young and grew used to it. It became normal, and I didn't understand why others didn't believe me when I mentioned it. For a few years, the strange occurrences faded, as if the ghostly presence had left. But in September of 1999, it all returned. By then, I was still in the same bedroom, the one with the Ouija board. One night, as I lay on my waterbed, I felt a sudden sense of paranoia, like something was standing right next to me. The only light came from a street lamp outside. Then, I saw it. A tall, dark hooded figure, about 6.5 feet tall. It had no face, just a shadowy, featureless form that glided across the room, passing the window and becoming more defined as the streetlight illuminated its outline. It moved slowly, gliding toward the closet at the foot of my bed, then back to where it started, only 4 feet from me. My feet were hanging off the end of the bed, and as the figure crossed that space, I hid my face under a pillow, too terrified to look. The temperature dropped from warm to a biting cold right as it passed near my feet. I could feel the cold seep into me, even through the pillow. I waited until I was certain it was gone, then bolted out of the room. Since that night, I've developed a foot phobia, and I can't sleep without a pillow over my head. A habit that started after that terrifying encounter. Things only got worse. At first, I was the only one who could hear or see the ghost. But soon enough, my younger sister, Amanda, encountered a spirit in the same room where I'd seen the apparition. One night, she heard the door crack open slightly and a soft, childlike voice say, "Amanda, come play." Startled, she rolled over and asked my older sister Allison, who shared the room with her, if she'd heard it too. Allison confirmed that she had. Eventually, I moved away for a year, but the paranormal activity continued. When I returned, I would hear loud, steady pacing up and down the stairs every night. It went on for months until I'd had enough and yelled, "Shut up!" just to get some sleep. My mom always brushed off my stories, thinking it was my imagination. But one night, while she was home alone, she heard something running up the stairs. Convinced it was an intruder, she lay there, bracing herself, but no one entered her room, and the house was empty. She once stayed in a different bedroom, the one next to mine, and saw an apparition at the foot of her bed. A Native American woman, watching her intently before disappearing. That night, my mom decided to assert her presence, sitting on the spot where the apparition had been and saying, "This is my house now. This is my room." We had the house blessed after this, but it didn't stop the strange sounds, footsteps, or occasional door movements. In 2002, we moved to Connecticut, and for the first time in years, we lived in peace. The apartment in Norwich felt calm. No footsteps, no voices, nothing out of place. But my fascination with the supernatural never went away. The memories of our haunted condo in Florida stayed with me, and soon I found myself drawn to paranormal investigations. My friends and I would drive down the back roads around Plainfield, Connecticut, especially a place called Hell's Hollow Road, rumored to be haunted. One night, while taking pictures, I captured a foggy figure of a small person with a decayed face in the frame. That was just the beginning. During another visit, I heard sounds like Native American chanting coming from the woods. I even saw a dark figure floating between the treetops. Definitely not a bird. At Hell's Hollow, a woman named Maud had been accused of witchcraft and murdered over 300 years ago, along with a native family killed by British troops in the same area. In one of my photos, thousands of orbs surrounded what looked like shadowy forms of people tied up or being attacked. I also visited Maud's grave and recorded the experience, and strange things started happening again after that visit. Shortly after, on my drive home from work, I felt pressure on the back of my seat, like someone was pushing against it. Another night, my friends and I were parked when my driver's side door suddenly slammed shut with no explanation. Back at my apartment, strange things began happening. The trash can lid would move on its own, doors would open and close, and I'd wake up in the night with a feeling of being watched. Images of twisted, evil faces would flash in my mind before I opened doors, as if warning me of something lurking just beyond. I often wonder if my curiosity in ghost hunting has brought this dark energy back into my life, or if something has followed me all these years. I'm still trying to understand what I can't explain, but I fear I may have attracted something more sinister than I bargained for. So, I'll recount the encounters that have unfolded in my family's home in Colorado from 1998 to the present. It's a ranch-style house, long and open, with a main floor and a basement. Most of the activity centers around the north corner guest bedroom and my bedroom directly below it in the basement. I'm sharing the experiences I can't logically explain. Sure, some things fell by accident, but the following events have no explanation beyond that of spirits residing in our home. It began when I was in 8th grade. One afternoon, as I was walking up the driveway flipping through the mail, I heard the front door slam. I looked up and saw a shadow move across the door's window. I assumed it was my mother, who was usually home at that time. But when I reached the door, it was locked. I thought she was playing a prank, so I called out to her, expecting her to pop out and scare me. But there was no answer. I checked her bedroom and study, only to find that I was completely alone. Thinking someone might have broken in, I grabbed a knife and searched the house, but found no one. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the encounters only intensified from there. Later, my parents remodeled the basement, creating rooms for my brother and me. My mother often invited friends over, so I was used to hearing people around the house. One afternoon, I came home and announced my arrival. I heard 2 women talking downstairs, in my bedroom, so I figured my mom was giving another one of her tours. But when I reached my room, I found it empty. The voices had been clear as day until I walked in. I felt a chill and left the room, more unnerved than ever. Feeling uneasy, I decided to hang a collection of masks above my bed, hoping they would ward off any spirits. But one day, I came home to find that all but 3 of the masks had been ripped from the wall and thrown across the room, one of them broken in 2. I thought it might have been my younger brother, but he'd been at school with me all day. When I asked my mom, she said she'd been out as well. I took the hint, packed away most of the masks, and apologized to the empty space, hoping to make peace. After that, things quieted down for a year or so, save for the occasional creaks in the night. Then, in high school, I noticed that strange things always happened between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. One night, I'd fallen asleep on the family room couch with my dog. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps coming from the guest bedroom. My heart pounded as the footsteps broke into a run, heading toward me with the cabinets shaking in their wake. My dog bolted off the couch and ran toward the sound. Just as the noise reached me, it came to an abrupt halt, followed by a high-pitched skid, like sneakers on a gym floor. I could see nothing but darkness around me. I flicked on a light, and although I eventually fell back asleep, the encounter left me shaken. I finally confided in my mother, who admitted she'd noticed the guest room closet doors were always open in the mornings, even though she closed them every night. Together, we decided that something was indeed in the house. Feeling somewhat validated, I decided to try contacting the spirits. I left a pen and paper out, hoping they would leave a note. I even set up recorders in my room but never caught anything. It seemed that each time I tried to gather evidence, the activity would stop altogether. Frustrated, I gave up. But in my junior year of high school, the activity escalated. It started small, a faint sound like a radio on the lowest setting waking me one night. Groggy, I hit my alarm clock, but the sound persisted even after I unplugged it. After some searching, I realized the noise was coming from a small soapstone figure on my bedside table. I could hear a man's voice, though I couldn't make out any words. Not sure what to make of it, I moved the figure to the far end of my room and went back to sleep. Around this time, I sensed the presence of a teenage girl. She never made loud noises or showed herself directly, but I felt her watching me with a quiet curiosity. Some nights, as I drifted off, I felt a gentle finger touch my cheek. Though the sensation frightened me, I never made any sudden movements. Cold spots started appearing more frequently around the house, even in the warmth of a hot shower. One night, I finally saw something. I had just locked up the house and was walking downstairs when two orbs of light, one copper and one silvery white, shot over the banister. Thinking it might be a car reflecting through a window, I checked, but the street was empty. It felt like my first glimpse of a spirit. Unfortunately, after that, the events took a frightening turn, almost to the point where I refused to sleep in my bedroom. I'd started college and was only home for the holidays. One night, I woke up in a panic, unable to move or breathe. I felt hands choking me, and I wasn't sure if I saw a shadow hovering over me or if my eyes were just adjusting to the darkness. Just as I was about to panic, the pressure lifted. I gasped for air and ran to the bathroom, where I saw faint finger marks fading from my neck. Telling myself it had been a nightmare, I moved upstairs to the couch. But even that didn't stop the activity. I'd hear things moving in the night, always on the edge of hearing. Determined to face my fear, I eventually moved back to my room. As I walked downstairs, I flicked off the light, and in an instant, a white hand shot out of the darkness toward my face. Startled, I flipped the light back on to find an empty stairwell. I felt like I was being ganged up on, but looking back, I think the teenage girl spirit was warning me not to return to the basement. Years later, my younger brother admitted he too had heard a man yelling and loud thuds in my room. I wonder if an angry spirit had passed through and that the house's permanent residents didn't approve. The last major events happened during my final year of college. I'd come home for winter break, and in classic fashion, dumped my suitcase onto my floor. That night, as I began to drift off, I heard the faint sound of footsteps crunching over my scattered papers. The sound moved slowly toward my bed until I couldn't bear it any longer. I flicked on the light and relocated to the couch upstairs. The most terrifying event came soon after. I woke up around 2:10 a.m. to the sound of two women talking in my room. The first time I'd heard them since middle school. Groggy, I asked, "Who's there?" And the conversation stopped. As I began to ask again, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the foot of my bed, rushing toward me. I panicked, flicked on the light, and sat frozen, gripping the lamp. My body shook with adrenaline, my eyes darting around the room. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but I didn't sleep for 2 days. No one else in the house had heard the scream, and to this day, I can't sleep in that room without a light on. Nothing major has happened since then. I'm well out of college now, and when I bring my fiancé home for holidays, we sleep in the guest bedroom. Some nights, we hear the closet doors rattle, but although it freaks her out, it hasn't scared her away. I feel my connection with the house's spirits has weakened over the years, and in some ways, I think that might be for the best. But part of me wonders if one day they'll return. My great-grandfather was a wonderful man, the happiest person I ever knew. He loved his family deeply, understood the value of hard work, was a talented artist, and put his whole heart into everything. Perhaps that's why he felt the need to build his home from the ground up. I wish I could tell you what year he built it, but I don't know exactly. Our family lived there for many years. My grandmother and her sisters grew up in that house, as did my mother. My brothers and I also spent most of our childhood there. It was a beautiful home in a historic part of Denver, not far from Molly Brown's house, actually. My earliest memories of it go back to when I was around 5 or 6, visiting my great-grandparents. The house always smelled like a mix of cookies and my great-grandmother's perfume. I'd find my great-grandfather sketching in his chair, fingers stained with shades of blue and red pastels. Jazz would play on the radio, and he'd get up to dance with my great-grandmother, who'd giggle, saying, "Oh, Joe, stop," before sitting back down. But enough reminiscing, on to the story. I spoke to my grandmother about it once. She was a skeptic and never experienced anything unusual in the house, which made sense since my great-grandfather had built it himself. But for my mother, growing up, there was a different experience. When she was about 4, she made an imaginary friend named Tabby, who, she claimed, was behind all the strange things that happened. My mother shared a large upstairs room with her cousin, Teresa, and whenever she got up in the morning, she'd find the carpet in the bathroom. Yes, my great-grandfather had carpeted the bathroom, completely soaked. She'd ask Teresa what she'd done, only to find her still asleep, claiming she hadn't gotten up at all. This went on for years. Could have been a plumbing issue, but my mother always insisted it was Tabby. Another recurring incident was the sound of footsteps going up and down the stairs late at night. They would go up, pause for a few minutes, then head back down, always at the same time each night. But the memory that stuck with my mom most happened one day after school. She ran upstairs to drop off her books and froze when she saw an indentation on her bed. A perfect outline of a small body and head lying on her pillow. Terrified, she ran out and started sleeping on Teresa's side of the room. Not long after, my grandparents moved to California for work. After my great-grandfather passed away, my great-grandmother went to a nursing home. My family moved into their house. My brothers took the room upstairs, while I stayed downstairs where my great-grandmother used to sleep. One night, I had trouble sleeping and heard what sounded like someone humming in the living room. I went to check, but no one was there. This happened a few other times, usually late at night, always in the living room or sometimes outside. One of my great-grandfather's favorite possessions was an old knitted tapestry of an owl. None of us thought it was particularly attractive, but he adored it. After he passed, no one wanted it, so we left it in a closet. Then one day, we came home to find it hanging on the closet doorknob in the exact place my great-grandfather used to keep it. My mom was convinced it was Grandpa Joe, though my dad didn't believe it. We put the tapestry in the basement closet after that. As I got older, odd things happened less frequently, or maybe I just paid less attention. But a few incidents still stand out. On weekends, I'd often stay up late and fall asleep on the couch. Usually, my dad would wake me up and tell me to go to bed. One night, as usual, a distinct male voice told me to go to my room. The next morning, I casually mentioned it to my mom, and she looked at me like I was insane. That night, my dad and brothers had been camping. When I realized this, my mom just shrugged and said, "Oh, it was Grandpa Joe." As I grew up, I started to develop artistic skills of my own. I was working on a project for art class one night and, frustrated with how it was turning out, threw it in the trash before leaving to go to a friend's house. When I came home hours later, I found the drawing lying on the center of my bed. No one else had been home to move it. My mother, of course, insisted it was my great-grandfather's way of telling me not to give up. A week after my great-grandmother passed away in the nursing home, the house began to smell like her perfume and cookies again. The scent would move from room to room, usually strongest when you walked in the door or in my room at the back of the house. The last incident I remember happened one Christmas. In our family, it was tradition to leave Christmas music playing all night on Christmas Eve. But this particular morning, instead of Christmas music, we woke up to jazz. The same kind of old-time jazz my great-grandfather used to play. The radio tuner was set to the same station we always used for holiday music, but it had somehow switched to jazz. After about half an hour, it changed back to Christmas music. Over time, we all grew up, and my parents eventually separated. They decided to sell the house. There was a lot of arguing and tension, and I think if my great-grandparents' spirits were there, they must have been uncomfortable with the conflict. We never experienced another encounter after that. Years later, my mom, fascinated with the paranormal, visited a psychic. The psychic described her imaginary friend Tabby perfectly, even mentioning her name. We wondered if some of the things we thought were my great-grandfather's doing were actually Tabby's all along. And the strange things that happened before he passed, like the outline of a child on my mom's bed, could those have been Tabby's as well? My mom often has vivid dreams about the house, where she can feel the cold, hard wood of the stairs under her feet. She even wonders if she's haunting the current residents because of how real her dreams feel. Is it possible that some other little girl in that house hears footsteps up and down the stairs late at night? Could it be my mother's spirit, unknowingly crossing an astral plane in her sleep? My mother certainly believes so, and if that's true, then who's to say something similar didn't happen before? Maybe the house always had a way of blending realms, where past and present meet in ways we can't fully understand. The most vivid paranormal experience I ever had happened when my parents moved us into a new house. This was a huge deal for us, as we didn't have much growing up. My parents had the three of us young, didn't finish school, and because of that, we all lived with my grandmother in a space far too small for our family. So, when we moved into our own place, it felt like a fresh start. But soon, our family started to change in ways that didn't feel like us. We'd always been close, having practically shared one room in the old house. But in the new house, things felt off. My dad began drinking heavily, leading to constant fights with my mom. My brother, who was always the closest to me, grew distant and almost hostile. At the time, I was 10, and he was 15. But suddenly, everything I said seemed to irritate him, and he dismissed me as childish. Not long after we moved in, I started having incredibly vivid nightmares. Each one was different, yet always the same in certain ways. In every dream, I was in the house, wearing the same clothes I'd gone to bed in, hiding or running from an older man. He looked like he was in his late 60s, tall and slim, with a look that radiated pure evil. He wore a distinctive hat, one that looked like an Abe Lincoln hat, though it was just a feeling I had that he was dangerous. I never knew exactly why I was running, but the fear was real. Thankfully, I always woke up just before he caught me. I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, drenched in sweat, lying there in the dark until I could fall asleep again. After about 3 months of these nightmares, my brother started praying every night before bed, which was unusual for him. I didn't ask why, not wanting to seem childish. Despite knowing my parents believed in the paranormal, I kept my own experiences to myself, not wanting to add to the tension in the house. To escape, I spent as much time as possible outside, riding bikes with neighborhood kids, doing anything to stay away from home. Then, one night, I had the same nightmare again, but it was different. This time, the man was chasing me with a knife. I could feel his presence every time I turned around, closer than ever before. I woke up mid-dream, more terrified than I'd ever felt. Lying on my side, I was paralyzed with fear, thinking how silly it was for a 10-year-old to be this scared. I tried to brush it off, thinking, well, at least he never catches me. But as soon as I thought this, I rolled onto my back, facing the ceiling instead of the wall. And there he was, the man from my nightmare, standing beside my bed, leaning over as if waiting for me to turn toward him. He looked exactly the same as in the dream, wearing the Abe Lincoln-style hat, but now he also had an old-fashioned black trench coat I hadn't seen before. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me, my heart sinking with terror. As soon as I fully registered what I was seeing, I screamed, and just like that, he was gone. My brother, who was still sharing a room with me, woke up and rushed over, asking what was wrong. Embarrassed, I mumbled, "Nothing." Usually, he'd press for an answer, but this time he just said, "It's okay, Ness," using my nickname, and assured me it was just a dream. The thing is, I never said it was a dream, nor did I mention seeing the man. But somehow he seemed to know. I'm convinced my brother had experienced the same nightmares because he didn't question me at all. The next day, neither of us brought it up, and I never told anyone else about the experience until now. What's strange is that after that night, I didn't have any more encounters quite like it. Occasionally, I'd feel like I wasn't alone or sense that someone was watching me. Small things would move around inexplicably, like finding my pens moved from my bed to the sock drawer or my drink moved to the other side of the table. Sometimes, while home alone after school, I'd hear footsteps or muffled whispers. A man and a young girl, maybe a toddler, coming from the far end of the house. But that was the only time I saw him up close, and I never experienced anything quite as terrifying again. Shortly after, we moved into a new house, bigger and the same price, so my parents took it. I don't know if anyone else had any experiences there, but I believe my brother had the same nightmare as me. I've experienced paranormal phenomena for as long as I can remember, and now, at 22, I'm convinced it isn't just places that are haunted, it's me. When I visit reportedly haunted locations, my experiences intensify, as though the energy recognizes me. I've had many encounters, but here's one of the earliest and most profound stories. One of my earliest experiences happened before I was even born. I'm the oldest of 3 children, and my mom, the youngest of 4, had moved with my dad into her sister's house, which they rented while my aunt worked abroad. The house was known to be haunted, often by the spirit of an old lady who was sensed rather than seen. Upstairs in a rarely used spare room, there was an old-fashioned cot that was too much trouble to move, so my mom left it there while cleaning the room. That's when the disturbances began. My mom would wake up at night to hear babies crying from the spare room, though my dad never heard it. She'd go upstairs, only for the cries to stop the moment she entered the room. Soon, she even started hearing faint crying during the day from downstairs, though again, the moment she focused on the sound, it would stop. The whole experience unsettled her, as she was the only one who could hear it. One day, my granddad, who was a painter and decorator, came over to do some work and stayed alone in the house while my parents were out. As he worked in the hallway, he heard the back door open and assumed my mom had returned. He then heard footsteps moving through the kitchen and saw a figure pass by the doorway leading from the hall. He called out twice, but received no reply. When he went into the kitchen, it was empty. Shrugging it off, he put the kettle on, but then heard footsteps heading up the stairs and across the landing. Someone was upstairs, but no one could have passed him. Thinking it was an intruder, he grabbed a kitchen knife and dashed upstairs, only to find the house completely empty. He later told my mom, who wasn't surprised, and shared her experiences of the babies crying at night. My dad, a skeptic, thought they were both imagining things until later that night. When my mom woke him once again claiming to hear babies crying, he decided to investigate. He went to the spare room, opened the door and turned on the light, only to find the cot moving gently, as though someone had just been rocking it. Needless to say, he screamed and bolted back to bed, though he tells a much braver version of the story now. After that night, the crying stopped, and the house seemed to settle down. My mom claims she never felt threatened by the sounds, even when they were at their peak. 9 months later, though, the real crying started when I was born. My mom believes the strange events were some kind of premonition, a spiritual sense of what was to come. And yes, I ended up sleeping in the same haunted cot. My parents moved the cot into their bedroom. While my mom suffered postnatal depression, she kept a close watch on me, hardly letting me out of her sight. Fortunately, there were no reports of the cot rocking on its own again, and the baby cries stopped except for mine. However, other disturbances began. We had a prism paperweight on the mantel that would end up on the floor every morning, as if someone was casually knocking it over. Cards set on tables for birthdays or holidays would be swiped off, as though someone had run their hand across them. The hallway became the center of the activity, and no matter how warm the day, it was always icy cold there. Whenever the hall froze over, something was bound to happen. By the time I was 4, I experienced my first clear encounter. I slept in the box bedroom at the end of the hall, a dark, tiny room that had once been my dad's office. One night, I awoke to see my door slightly ajar and a figure standing by my bed, a dark silhouette. I screamed at it to leave, and it backed away toward the door, disappearing. I remember it vividly and have dismissed theories that I was just dreaming. Another night, I woke up and saw what I believe was the same presence. This time it was clearer. A transparent figure of an old woman stood at the foot of my bed, motionless, expressionless. After a moment, she simply faded away. I felt calm at the time, but thinking back on it now, it scares me. Over the years, I saw her again and again in my room, in the hall, even in the living room, where everyone could feel her pass through like a chill in the air. We grew accustomed to her presence, though occasionally she'd spook us by playing up. The radio volume would suddenly turn up on its own, or we'd come home to find the television on. My younger brother saw her the most, especially in the box bedroom. After we moved out 7 years ago, my aunt moved back in, and she, too, has seen the figure countless times. Despite the activity, she's never felt malicious, only a quiet, lingering presence. Looking back, I realized that some of us may be more connected to these energies than others. And for me, that connection has been a constant presence, one that I've come to accept, whether I'm in a haunted house or not. After my parents' divorce last year, I moved out with my mom while my dad stayed in the house we'd called home for 9 years. This house was a barn conversion. When we first bought it, it was nothing more than ruins and old animal troughs. With the help of some friends, my dad worked hard to make it livable. The property was made up of 3 barns arranged in an L shape, with 2 bungalows side by side and a third barn positioned at a right angle to them. While cleaning and renovating, we lived in a small caravan and then moved into the farthest barn once it was complete. That first barn had a comforting atmosphere, a feeling I describe as clean and peaceful. Later, we discovered it was built on a lode line of rose quartz, a stone associated with positive energy and healing. But our ultimate goal was to live in the main, 2-story farmhouse. I still remember moving into the big house. The atmosphere was entirely different. The air felt heavy and stifling, almost oppressive. On our very first night there, my parents put me in a different room. Around 3 a.m., I heard screams echoing through the house. I was too terrified to move, listening as raised voices filled the air. Eventually, the sounds faded, and I fell into an uneasy sleep. Those eerie experiences repeated throughout my early childhood. My mom became visibly unhappy and insisted on switching bedrooms. We used her old room only for storage afterward, and although I would occasionally hear strange sounds coming from it, my dad dismissed it as just the house settling. He was a complete skeptic when it came to anything supernatural. My mom, on the other hand, avoided that room entirely, though she never explained why. As a child, I rarely went in there except to use the computer we'd set up. The room made me uneasy, but my curiosity for games and chat rooms often overpowered that fear. Eventually, I reached the age where I wanted my own space, and I was given my mom's old storeroom. This has been my room ever since whenever I stay with my dad. But the unease never went away. I still don't like sleeping with the lights off, and sometimes even with the lights on, I wake up to strange sights. In one particular corner of the room, I've seen eyes watching me from the shadows, and on a few occasions, a figure of a man standing in that same spot. His presence is far from comforting. Despite keeping the windows open, the room always feels heavy and still. It wasn't until recently, though, that I learned the full story of my room. I was chatting with my mom about paranormal experiences, and she finally opened up about hers. On that very first night, when I had heard the screams, my mom had woken up to see a man hanging from the ceiling beam in her room. Terrified, she shook my dad awake, but he brushed her off, saying she was imagining things. The man wasn't moving, yet she swore she could see his eyes scanning the room until they settled on her. She squeezed her eyes shut, unable to sleep the rest of the night. Over the next few nights, she saw him again, especially in that same corner of the room, his eyes watching her. She kept these experiences to herself, but eventually, she started asking locals about the house's history. She learned that a farmer had once owned the property. He'd been involved in some questionable dealings, which had eventually led to financial ruin. Devastated, he'd committed suicide, right in what is now my bedroom. We never talked about the room's haunted history, but my mom's friend, a devout Christian, once put her arm around her and said, "Don't worry, I'm praying for you." My mom was unsure why, but soon after, she was diagnosed with cancer. She came to believe that the dark energy in the house might have contributed to her illness, that there was something malevolent in that room. She also admitted she had always feared for my sister and me, sensing that the presence was a threat. I've tried a few cleansing rituals I found online. Burning sage, firmly asking the spirit to leave, but nothing seems to work. I'm at a loss and could really use some advice. I'm hesitant to involve a priest, as my dad, still skeptical, would likely think I've gone mad. In the mid-1990s, my mother bought an old Victorian railway station house in southern England. The station itself was still in use, though trains rarely stopped due to its secluded location. The house was quintessentially Victorian, complete with a creepy tower that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. I stayed there most weekends, but from the beginning, I felt uneasy. Sleeping in my room was hard, as there was no TV for comfort. The only television was in the living room, so each night, after everyone went to bed, I would sneak downstairs with my duvet to watch TV. The living room had 3 large bay windows that opened directly onto the station platform. While this sounds unnerving, few people actually used the station, and my mother had put up thick, dark curtains. Still, she worried about security and insisted we always lock the heavy door separating the living room from the rest of the house. The first night I went down to watch TV, I was already nervous about being alone. After grabbing a drink from the kitchen, I quickly turned on the TV and a couple of lamps, which helped me relax. At some point, I fell asleep but was startled awake by a loud thud. The room was pitch dark. The lamps and TV were off, and an inexplicable fear rooted me in place. I eventually mustered the courage to turn on a lamp. Everything seemed fine, except the TV had been turned off at the mains, and the door, which I'd left open, was now closed. When I tried the handle, I realized the door was locked. Panic quickly turned to anger as I assumed my sister or stepdad had locked me in as a prank. I considered climbing out through a window to get around to the front of the house. But just then, I noticed the key sitting on the mantelpiece. Not sure how it got there, I grabbed it, unlocked the door, and bolted upstairs to bed. The next day, I tried to brush off the incident, but the uneasy feeling lingered. That night, I decided to go to bed at the same time as everyone else, but my sister and I couldn't sleep. We went downstairs together to watch TV. I had pocketed the key and opened the door fully, dragging an old, heavy sewing machine in front of it. My sister looked at me, confused, so I told her what had happened the night before. Her face paled, and she revealed that she'd been woken up the previous night by someone viciously pulling her hair to the point some had been yanked out. We tried to focus on the TV and relax, but soon my sister got sleepy and went back upstairs, leaving me alone. I later awoke in darkness. The TV and lamps were off, and once again, the door was closed. Fear gripped me as I reached for the key still in my pocket. There was no way my sister could have moved the sewing machine. It was far too heavy, and moving it would have made a lot of noise. Heart pounding, I approached the door, unlocked it, and stepped into the hall. As I glanced toward the kitchen, an intense, heavy growl filled the room. I was too scared to look and quickly made my way upstairs. On the way, I noticed the sewing machine had been moved to the middle of the hall, but I ignored it and went to bed, staying awake until sunrise. After that, I avoided going downstairs alone at night. I even started sneaking brandy to help me sleep while begging my mom for a TV in my room. Not long after, my mother told me that one morning she tried to open the living room door, but it wouldn't budge. My stepdad had to help her, and when they finally managed to open it, they found the sewing machine blocking the door. A few years passed with only minor disturbances, like finding my curtains open every morning, even though I closed them each night. Then my mother decided to redecorate the tower room to use as a guest room. The tower, which I mentioned earlier, was separated from the rest of the house by a small staircase leading to a split landing. One set of stairs went to the bedrooms while the other led down to a room beneath the tower, which also housed the bathroom. No one liked the tower area. It had an oppressive atmosphere, and I was so uneasy there that I'd only use the bathroom with the door open. As we stripped the wallpaper from the room below the tower, we uncovered old, faint pencil markings. Drawings of faces, some grotesque and others beautiful, but all strange. When we removed the carpet, we found deep grooves in the floorboards. We replaced some of the most damaged boards and discovered an old scroll tied with ribbon underneath. My stepdad tried to retrieve it with coal tongs, but it disintegrated in his grasp, leaving its contents a mystery. The tower itself was accessible only by a narrow staircase leading to a trapdoor. The space was completely impractical, so it remained unused. After redecorating, we started hearing strange dragging noises from the tower. One morning, my stepdad and I went up to investigate, only to find the floor covered in dead flies. It was as though a whole swarm had somehow entered and died there. He was disturbed and confided that the previous owners had told him they'd had a priest attempt an exorcism, but it hadn't worked. A few weeks later, my mother bought my sister a kitten. Playful and curious, it would often dash through the house, but would sometimes linger uneasily in the tower area. One night, I got up to use the toilet, and as I passed the doorway to the tower room, I saw the kitten crouched there, as if frozen. I called to him, but he seemed paralyzed, held in an unnatural position as if by some unseen force. I scooped him up, but he remained tense and terrified, eventually wetting himself in my arms. His fur was on end, and he dug his claws into me, trembling with fear. When I checked him over, I found his tail and 4 of his front teeth had been broken. After that, he refused to come inside, and my mum had to rehome him. This was the turning point. My mother and stepdad took things more seriously, but the activity only escalated. My mother asked us not to visit for a while, saying things were getting out of hand. Family members who stayed in the converted tower room reported being attacked, and my stepdad saw something in their bedroom that terrified him into silence. Even my mother, typically skeptical, began experiencing things. One evening, she was in the bath in the tower bathroom when a power cut plunged the house into darkness. She got out, wrapped in a towel, to check the fuse. As she entered the tower room, she heard a heavy thud from above, as if something had dropped from the trapdoor. Panicking, she tried to leave, but she couldn't find her way in the dark. The room's layout felt completely different. Eventually, she stumbled out, and shortly after, we all decided to move. On our last night, we were all on edge. My sister and I each had TVs in our rooms by then, so we went to bed with them on and kept our doors open. Soon, my sister screamed. Sparks were shooting from the back of her TV. We quickly turned it off, and she came to sleep in my room. Moments later, the same thing happened to my TV, and it finally blew out completely. We stayed up until sunrise, and when morning came, we moved with no regrets, all of us relieved to leave that place behind. My house is pretty old, around 80 years, according to my mum. My Grams believes in the paranormal, but the rest of my family is skeptical, so we rarely discuss it. The first strange thing I remember happened when I was about 6. I had chicken pox and couldn't sleep because of the itchiness, so my mum let me stay up late. It was around midnight, and I was watching Jurassic Park alone, though my mum was in the next room if I needed her. We have this big, old-fashioned fireplace that we rarely use, and it wasn't lit that night. During a funny part of the movie, I giggled, and then I heard a laugh, quiet but gruff, like a man's. I turned to the fireplace and saw a man's head there, just for a second before it disappeared. Strangely, I wasn't scared. I just went back to watching the film. Nothing really strange happened for the next few years, aside from a few shadows that I mostly attributed to other things. But when I was 10, my friends and I decided to play Bloody Mary. We made the bathroom dark, filled the sink with water, and said Bloody Mary 3 times. The mirror fogged over, and suddenly, the room felt icy, and I couldn't move. My friends had run out, and after a few seconds, One of them switched on the light and asked why I hadn't left when it got cold. I told her I couldn't move. We never spoke about it again. Fast forward a few more uneventful years, and then the more unsettling stuff started happening. I was 13 when we had our hall redecorated. It runs the length of our bungalow, and all the rooms except the kitchen and mine are off it. We replaced the thick carpet with wood flooring, and then strange things began. In the early evening, when we'd all be in the lounge or dining room, we'd hear sounds like something being pushed through the letterbox. Then, footsteps would echo down the hall, followed by a loud bang. Sometimes we'd find the trapdoor to the attic open and swinging, even though it's held by a heavy lock that shouldn't allow it to move like that. The most unsettling moments were when it sounded like the front door opened, followed by footsteps. Our front door is old, heavy, and very stiff. It makes a loud noise when it opens. This usually happened just before sunset. My dad, who's on my Gram's side, thought it could be spirits, but my mom and sister insisted there had to be logical explanations. More recently, I had a particularly strange experience with my sister. We were watching a comedy in my room, the lights on bright, neither of us remotely scared. Out of nowhere, my shoe flew across the room and hit the radiator, barely missing me. We both screamed and ran out of the room to tell our parents, but they didn't believe us. Even now, I'm sure it happened because my sister, who's the most skeptical person I know, saw it too. She doesn't like to talk about it now, but at the time she admitted seeing the shoe fly, though she still thinks there must be a logical explanation. My room has an odd energy. It used to be a sewing room and then a bathroom, so it's pretty small, but a lot of unsettling things happen there. My bed is high, and I often feel as if something is climbing up it. I also hear random banging sounds on the floor. The house is noisy at night, so I usually play an audiobook to drown out the sounds, but sometimes it pauses and starts playing again on its own, which I try to explain away, but it's getting harder to ignore. When I'm not listening to anything, I sometimes hear a soft whistling, like someone waiting nearby. House history. Before us, an elderly lady lived here. She was a librarian who knew my mom, who's lived on the street her entire life. The lady moved in with relatives about 25 years ago, so we assume she's no longer alive since she was already quite old when she left. When we've peeled wallpaper off the walls to repaper, we've found writing underneath, scrawled by children. It could be from her kids or grandkids, or maybe even from an owner before her. We're not really sure. When my mother was around 10 years old, she began experiencing an unsettling sense of being watched in the house where she lived with her parents and 9 older siblings. She was the youngest of the family, but no one else ever sensed anything unusual. Yet, as the days passed, she often found herself alone in the house, especially with her mother busy in the large garden she loved so much. That's when things became stranger. Footsteps could be heard pacing up and down the stairs, and loud bangs echoed through the empty rooms. Though unnerving, she convinced herself that it was nothing harmful and tried to ignore it. Curious, my mother eventually researched the history of the house. Built between the world wars, it had had only one previous owner, a woman who had passed away within its walls. Later, my grandmother's first husband had also died in the same house. Despite this, my mother believed neither of these spirits were malevolent, which eased her worry, though the strange disturbances became an almost daily occurrence. As she grew older, the sounds became part of her daily life, something she had learned to brush off. But one night when she was 16, my grandmother left her alone to attend a friend's birthday party. With her older siblings moved out and her father working night shifts, she was used to being alone. Settling into the living room, she soon felt the same familiar sensation of being watched. Moments later, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Attempting to brush it off, she asked aloud, "Is anyone there?" Just as the words left her mouth, the large living room window flew open, and an unexpected gust of wind snuffed out the fire, leaving her stunned in the quiet. When she told her mother later, she dismissed it as the stormy weather. 3 years later, when my mother was pregnant with me, she was preparing to move in with my father but was still staying with her parents. She needed to run to the library before it closed and rushed upstairs to grab her library card. As she turned to leave her room, she absent-mindedly pushed a solid, black hooded figure out of her way. It wasn't until she was on her way back from the library that she realized what she had done. Returning to her room, she found nothing, only the eerie quietness left behind. Shortly after I was born, my grandmother suffered a heart attack on Christmas Day and passed away the following February. To support my grandfather, we moved back into the house, and soon after, the mysterious knocks and footsteps resumed. At first, my mother was the only one to hear them, but as I grew older, I started to hear them too. It was a small relief to my mother to have someone else confirm what she'd been experiencing. As the years passed, the disturbances continued in small doses, familiar yet unsettling. When I was 7, my little brother was born, and the house became too cramped for our growing family. Just before Christmas, we moved into a new home, leaving my grandfather to manage the house on his own. He did his best to maintain it, especially my grandmother's beloved garden, but after my second little brother's birth, his health rapidly declined. He was diagnosed with cancer and sadly passed away within the year. Following his death, the haunting presence in the house took on a darker tone. When my mother and I visited to decorate for Christmas, a sense of unease washed over us as we entered her old bedroom. A chilling feeling overwhelmed us, as though something wanted us gone, whispering in our minds, "Get out." Disturbed, we quickly left. The house was eventually sold to a family friend, but soon after moving in, they reported hearing the same mysterious knocks and bangs. Curiously, only the mother and her son experienced these disturbances. Her daughters and husband heard nothing. Over time, things started moving on their own. Glasses and plates left in the kitchen would shatter unexpectedly. Neglecting the garden, however, seemed to worsen the house's condition. Dampness and rot spread rapidly through the walls and floorboards at an unnaturally fast rate, according to repair professionals. No matter how many times the family tried to repair it, the damage persisted, almost as though the house was resisting their presence. In desperation, they tried to sell it, but the house simply wouldn't attract any buyers. Finally, they decided to demolish it and rebuild. Before they could act, my mother and her siblings, reluctant to see the family home destroyed, chipped in and bought the house back. Strangely, once it was back in our family, the activity settled down somewhat, and the damp and dry rot stopped spreading. We restored the garden and converted the house into an inn, expecting some paranormal reaction, but the spirits, or whatever presence lingered, seemed unbothered. The strange activity returned to the levels my mother had experienced in her childhood. The one exception, however, is my mother's old room. It still carries an uneasy atmosphere that unsettles guests who stay there. Several visitors have mentioned seeing a shadow lingering in the room, and I myself have seen it on occasion. So, in a way, this story remains ongoing. The presence in that room still lingers, but we're in no rush to drive it away. After all, a haunted inn has a way of attracting customers. I should start by saying that I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. I've never believed that what you see is all there is, or that life simply begins, happens, and then ends without anything more. Growing up Roman Catholic with Irish roots, I've always believed in God, but I've never been a model Catholic, especially where the Bible is concerned. Over the past year, I've emerged from a dark phase in my life. For a long time, I was angry with God and blamed him for everything that felt wrong. I struggled with alcoholism, lost many friends, and spent years without realizing that I was addicted. I'd drink heavily, then stop for stretches, all the while suffering withdrawal symptoms, depression, and wondering why I felt miserable. Thankfully, that chapter of my life is over now, and I'm grateful for it because it made me stronger. That old saying, "Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger," has taken on new meaning for me. Now, when I face difficulties, I don't crumble. I find a way to deal with them. Recently, I've been making an effort to be a better Catholic, praying, reading the Bible, and making changes in my life. And oddly enough, since starting this, strange things have been happening. Yes, this is eventually a ghost story. I live in a small village, the kind with just a church, a few shops, and a handful of pubs where my friends and I gather to break up the monotony. A few nights ago, I came across an article about God that described him as the very embodiment of love, almost love personified. Before reading it, I'd seen him more as a strict, vengeful figure, but this new perspective left me feeling uplifted. It was around 9:30 p.m., and I decided to walk to the pub. I left the house with a big smile, feeling lighter than I had in ages. As I walked past the church, I noticed an elderly couple walking hand in hand. They seemed like a lovely pair, and I found myself smiling at the sight of them. The man was tall and wore an old-fashioned hat, and they both seemed entirely solid and real. Nothing transparent or unusual about them, just a bit oddly dressed. As I got closer, I noticed the woman's face. Her skin was pale, almost like it had an antique quality. She didn't look old in the usual sense, but rather like she belonged to another time. She kept her eyes on the ground, looking quite distressed, though I didn't realize this until I thought back later. I've lived in this village most of my life and know almost everyone, yet I had never seen these two before. I smiled warmly at her, not thinking much of it, expecting her to smile back. But as we passed, she lifted her gaze and looked straight into my eyes. Her face held a sadness that was hard to ignore, and then her gaze dropped, almost instinctively, to my chest, her face still full of despair. I shrugged it off, but strangely, the next day at work, I felt a slight ache in my chest. Could have just been heartburn, but it unsettled me. Later that night, I was at the pub with friends, and a few of us stepped outside for a cigarette. I was thinking that I should probably quit smoking, considering my renewed commitment to faith, when one of my friends, who isn't at all religious, suddenly sang out, "Jesus Christ died for our sins." No one else reacted or even seemed to notice. I was so surprised that I didn't think to ask him why he said it. The next day passed uneventfully, but I had a moment of worry and found myself silently asking God for protection. Almost instantly, a thought appeared in my head. God is protecting you. Felt like more than just my imagination. Something similar happened again the following evening. I'd paused to watch TV, and a thought struck me that I shouldn't be watching such violent and blasphemous content. I turned away from the screen, and as I did, I felt like something tall and shadowy was right beside me. But when I looked, nothing was there. I muttered woe to myself, convinced I'd seen something, but unsure. Lately, I keep seeing things out of the corner of my eye, especially when I'm lying in the living room alone. There's always something in the same spot, toward the top right corner of the room, just in my peripheral vision. I've brushed it off as imagination, but it keeps reappearing, sometimes closer to the TV near the floor. If I try to look directly, there's nothing there, yet it keeps happening. There's another phenomenon I experience while walking up the stairs in my house, a sort of blue mist that sometimes appears. I saw it earlier, in fact, as I went downstairs for a coffee. Unlike the shadowy figures, I can look at this mist directly, and it lingers for about 10 to 20 seconds before slowly fading. I only ever see it when going up the stairs and nowhere else. Now, back to the spirits. Yesterday around 1 p.m., I was walking home from the shop with some smokes and a few bottles in a bag. I was almost home when I noticed an elderly woman walking towards me. I'd been thinking about the old couple by the church, so I looked a little closer this time. This woman had the same pale, antique appearance, with thin, wispy hair and a deeply sad expression. She wore black and carried a small handbag. Again, I'd never seen her before, though she was only meters from my house. As we approached, she looked up at me, her expression one of shock. Startled, I quickly looked down but felt her gaze on me again. A look of sorrow that sent a chill down my spine. As we passed, I took another quick glance. She seemed so frail, and her skin was pale as paper. I half expected her to look at my chest, like the woman near the church, but instead, she looked down at the bag in my hand, seeming sadder than ever. When I looked back, she was still there, walking away in broad daylight, head down and still visible. Is this normal for seeing spirits? Are these even spirits? I always thought spirits appeared faint and transparent, not this clear. Part of me thinks they might just be elderly strangers, but it feels far too unusual. This is all new to me, and I find it both fascinating and unsettling. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just going a bit mad. Other odd things have happened to me before this, like frequent déjà vu or dreams that come true, though usually in trivial ways. I also often think about saying something, only to have a friend say the exact words seconds later. Many things have happened to me. Some seen, some heard, and others simply felt. I've been busy, often trying to ignore the strange occurrences around me. But some nights, I feel the fear so deeply it shakes me to my core. It began on Friday, September 11th. My partner had left for a festival, leaving me alone with our 2 cats for an extended stay. Since my youngest was at his grandmother's, I had the place to myself. Sitting on the sofa that first evening, I thought about how I'd manage 11 days without him. Eventually, I got up and spent a couple of hours cleaning, then showered and settled down to work, feeling a little uneasy but trying to keep myself calm. Later that evening, around 10:30 p.m., I decided to head to bed. I was anxious about sleeping alone, but the cats were inside, which gave me some sense of security. While watching a film, I happened to glance toward a plant by the window, and that's when I noticed it. A face. Transparent and hazy, almost lost among the leaves. It stared from the wall, faint but unmistakable. I tried to convince myself it was a reflection or that I was simply overtired, but each time I looked, it remained there unchanged. Around 11:30, I turned off the TV, locked up, and ushered the cats into my bedroom, giving one last glance at the plant to see if the face was still there. It was. I left the door slightly ajar as I walked through the flat, checking each lock and appliance. I made my way to bed, leaving the hallway light on and turning on the radio to drown out any eerie silence. With the cats nestled on either side of me, I lay down, listening to the music, hoping I'd drift off soon. As I lay there, I suddenly felt a soft, steady pressure climbing up my legs. Half asleep, I assumed it was Smokey, but when I whispered for him to stop, the sensation continued. Moving my legs didn't help either, and when I looked over, both cats were sound asleep beside me. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. Soon, I felt the bed sway gently, almost like a rocking motion, and then nothing. Eventually, sleep overtook me, but I woke early the next morning, unable to shake off the unease. The days that followed seemed to fly by. Occasionally, I'd catch sight of fleeting human shapes, darting through the hallway and into the bedroom. My son returned from his grandmother's, and I was able to distract myself from these strange figures, which only seemed to increase. On Tuesday evening, my brother came over. I stayed with him until he got up to leave around 10:30 p.m., reminding him to wake me so I could lock up. Despite my recent restlessness, I fell asleep almost immediately, only to be woken when he left. I locked up behind him and went back to bed, leaving the hallway light on as usual. As I settled in, a wave of nausea washed over me, and the room's temperature seemed to plummet. I checked the windows, found them closed, and lay back down, curling into a fetal position to ease the sick feeling. My eyes closed, but the moment they did, it was as though I was pulled into darkness. I felt an overwhelming sense of suffocation, as if someone was standing over me, pressing down. Through the thick darkness, I could just make out a form. A figure cloaked in white robes, arms wrapped tightly around me, keeping me trapped. My attempts to shout were muffled, and my mind raced, desperate to reach my brother for help, though I knew he was already gone. Finally, I felt myself thrown back into my body, and I woke up, shouting, "Leave me alone! Just leave me alone!" The rest of the week passed with an intense unease. Each night, the bed would shake gently or sway, and I'd catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye. Then, 2 nights ago on Friday, I went to bed after working late with my partner. It was around 1:30 in the morning. I kissed him goodnight and headed to bed alone, leaving the hallway light off since he was still up, and the living room lamp was on. I fell asleep quickly but woke around 3 a.m. after a dream. Feeling safe with the distant hum of the TV, I closed my eyes and tried to drift back to sleep. Lying on my stomach, I felt that same pressure slowly creeping up my legs again. Trying to shake it off, I shifted, but the weight continued moving, pressing up to my hips. My pulse quickened, and finally, I couldn't help but cry out, "Leave me alone! Leave me alone!" I sat up, looking around. My partner was asleep on the sofa, oblivious to my distress. Shaken but too tired to do much else, I lay back down, and once more the bed began to sway, gently rocking until sleep finally overtook me. Growing up, I had a clear stance on ghosts, spirits, and anything remotely supernatural. They didn't exist. I remember our family Christmases, sitting around and watching Casper, the friendly ghost. Harmless and cute, he was a character we all loved. But he was just that, a cartoon. Nothing more. But my belief in the non-existence of ghosts completely changed after one particular encounter. It was an ordinary summer day. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and my family decided to visit my granddad. We lived in a bustling town with clear, pleasant weather, but Granddad lived far up north, where the climate always felt different, like stepping into another country, or perhaps another world. Being young, I thought nothing of it at the time. All 4 of us made our way to Granddad's old farmhouse. The house itself looked ancient, its windows clouded and dim, as if touched by time and memories of past lives. Even the surrounding houses, though newer, held a heavy silence. The wind was the only sound, occasionally rustling the trees, so unlike the endless hum of life back home. Stepping inside, I felt a strange atmosphere, like the walls were filled with whispers of past lives, as if the house was frozen in time. The living room, with its open log fire and old, worn couches, eventually felt warm, though it never quite shook the chill that seemed to hang in the air. But it was upstairs where things truly felt different. To use the bathroom, we had to go up those narrow, steep stairs, which I always found unsettling. I couldn't tell if it was the stairs themselves, or the pictures that lined the walls. Most of the photos were simple family pictures, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was one black and white portrait of a woman with jet black hair tied back, her expression cold and distant. Something about her face haunted me. Every time I passed by, a shiver ran through me, though I didn't understand why. On that particular day, I went upstairs alone, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Everything seemed fine until I stepped out into the hallway, the long, winding stretch that branched off to the other rooms. Standing outside the bathroom door, I felt a prickle of anxiety, a nagging sense that I wasn't alone up there. Just as I was about to make my way back downstairs, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. It was then that I saw her. She appeared out of nowhere, like a shadow cast by something I couldn't see. She looked like an elderly lady, much older than the woman in the photo. Her long gray hair was permed and wild, and she wore a tattered, old-fashioned dress, almost like the uniform of a maid from another time. She was short, but her presence was impossible to ignore. Who was she? Why was she in my granddad's house? I wondered if perhaps she was just a friend of the family, someone staying over, though it seemed unlikely, as no one had mentioned her. Maybe Mum and Dad didn't tell us so we wouldn't be startled. For a moment, I wasn't scared. She even seemed kind, with a sweet smile that felt familiar somehow. But the longer I looked, the stranger it felt. Her smile lingered just a little too long, as if time had slowed down, and something about it made my stomach twist. It dawned on me then, this woman might not be real. She could be someone from the past, someone who had come back, if only for a moment, to haunt me. The realization sent a surge of fear through me. I screamed, turned, and bolted down the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me, never looking back to see if she was still there, never checking to see if she followed. All I wanted was to forget I'd ever seen her. Though I don't remember, I must have told my parents, because they ended up mentioning it to other family members. Would anyone believe a 6-year-old girl? Weeks later, my cousin visited and went upstairs, and he too saw something in the hallway. His description matched mine exactly. I knew then that what I'd seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination. She was real. After my granddad passed away a few years later, the old farmhouse was renovated and turned into flats, changing the place forever. Sometimes I wonder, with all the renovations and new residents, if she still lingers in those hallways or if she's finally moved on. I guess I'll never know. I'm 15 and known to be a pretty mature student at school. I've never touched drugs or alcohol, and while I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, certain experiences have left me open to the idea. I've never used a Ouija board or tarot cards, although I recently tried angel cards with a friend. Strangely, they were very accurate, but nothing happened after that. Recently, I spent a week on holiday in Cornwall with my friend and her family. The house we stayed in was cozy and inviting, but it gave me chills whenever I was alone in a room, especially in the downstairs bathroom near the kitchen. I never mentioned this to my friend or her family, and from what I could tell, they didn't seem to feel anything unusual about the place. The first 4 nights were fine, but on the 5th night, I woke up in the early hours of the morning. I wasn't sure what woke me, but I had a strong sense that something was wrong. Glancing around, I noticed a figure at the foot of my bed near the bedpost. She wore a white nightdress, her black hair falling around her shoulders, though her face was blurred. I wasn't paralyzed, and I managed to let out a cry before burying myself under the quilt. I was flooded with fear, and my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my chest. The next morning, I told my friend about it, but she laughed, thinking I was joking, and that was the end of that. Later that night, we joined a local story walk, where a guide shared the history and ghost stories of the town. That's when I learned that at the bottom of our street, there was an old plague pit where bodies were buried during the Black Plague. Some people had been buried alive, mistaken for dead while in comas. The road behind our house had also once been a coffin route leading to the cemetery. After hearing this, I couldn't sleep well for the rest of the trip, afraid I'd see the figure again. But luckily, I didn't. This wasn't my first encounter with strange figures. My parents built our old house before I was born, so I know of no tragic history there, though they did find evidence of early settlers nearby, including old house foundations. One experience stands out from when I was very young. I was sitting at my desk, practicing my times tables, when I heard someone call my name. It was a feminine voice, but it didn't sound like my mother or brother. I went to the kitchen to ask my dad if anyone had called me, and he said no. Another night, I woke up to see a woman in a white nightdress standing beside my bed. She had brown hair this time, but her face was indistinct. I don't remember exactly when this happened, but at another point, I woke to see a figure on the opposite bed. It looked like a man, maybe a farmer, wearing brown trousers, a cream shirt, and suspenders. He also wore a cap, and although his face was blurred, I knew he was staring straight ahead, not at me. These incidents happened in my old house, but due to certain circumstances, we had to build a new one down the street, next to my grandmother's place. Oddly, everything that happened in the old house started happening in the new one too. 2 months ago, I saw the same farmer again, only this time he was kneeling beside my couch with his head resting on his arms, as if he was praying. Our new house, like the old one, was built on what used to be part of my grandfather's farm. While we were waiting for it to be completed, we lived with my grandmother for a year. Nothing happened during that time, but as soon as we moved, the strange experiences returned. Even on vacations, I've sometimes heard animal cries that no one else seems to hear, and I've seen shadowy figures in the dark, though they weren't the same farmer or woman. Sometimes, a high-pitched noise fills my ears, making everything sound as if I'm underwater. At home or abroad, there are moments when tears fall down my face for no reason, and with them comes an overwhelming sadness, as though I've lost someone dear. Most of these experiences happen after dark, or in the early hours of the morning. I'll catch glimpses of figures out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn, nothing's there. I've seen things move in the glass of doors or windows, but never in a mirror. In total darkness, vague white shapes begin to form a short distance away. I don't know how to make these experiences stop. They leave me shaken, and I find it hard to sleep for days afterward. Even writing this has been difficult. I'm not used to talking about it. I've only told one friend about what I saw in Cornwall, and none of my family knows about my other experiences. I don't want people to see me differently. I just want to live without the constant chills and the feeling of being watched, even in my own home. It's gotten so bad that I can't sleep in my room without the door open and someone else upstairs. And being alone in the dark, I'm terrified. This isn't exactly a story. It's more like an account of things I've been noticing over the last few months. My question is, am I psychic? Or at least, am I showing some signs of it? I've been keeping a list on my computer of these odd occurrences, and while they're probably nothing, A second opinion would be nice. My friends are very science-minded and believe strongly in God, which isn't a bad thing. It actually helps keep me grounded. They often help me see a logical side to things. But even with that, I'm still not convinced there isn't something else going on. The first incident I remember was predicting my GCSE ICT paper 1 result perfectly. I told my friend Jack, I have a feeling I got a D with 145 UMS marks. And I was right. Then there's the déjà vu, which I experience constantly. I'll get a strong sense that I've been somewhere before and sometimes even remember enough details to guide my friends through places we've supposedly never visited. It's almost frustrating because I'll say, we've been here before, right? And my friends will say no. But then I can still find my way, even when we haven't been there. I also have dreams that come true. For instance, I dreamed that my cousin's hamster would start an argument. And it did. I dreamed that my friend Fern would storm off after going nuts at us in the field. And everything happened exactly as I dreamed, right down to her waving as she left. Another time, I dreamed my dad would get me a rock music-related gift, and he did, a bullet for my Valentine t-shirt. One of the most annoying parts is that I often know when something's about to happen. In maths class, some boys were throwing a ball across the room, and I just knew it was coming our way. I told my friend Ceci to duck, and seconds later, the ball flew past. I knew my flute was broken before I even opened its case. And once, I knew Tesco wouldn't have Heat magazines before my mom went to check. I even knew what my parents were planning for my prom. A surprise taxi decked out by our neighbor to pick us up. I know exactly what it will look like and what time it will arrive. Even when it comes to my friends, I somehow knew Kat, Michael, and Ceci had decided to buy me Sims 3 for my birthday before they'd even bought it. I'm also surprisingly good at reading people. I can often sense what they're feeling and why, even if they haven't told me anything. Once, Ceci was sitting in science class, visibly upset, but she hadn't talked to me in ages. I found myself walking over and saying, Ceci, are you okay? Don't worry about your mom. Everything will be all right. She looked stunned, especially because she hadn't told anyone what was happening, and she asked, How did you know? I didn't tell anyone. I had to make something up to cover. This happens a lot. It's as if I know what people are about to say or tell me, without them having to say a word. Another habit is that I tend to know the endings of books and films before I've read or watched them. Even if it's my first time, I'll just know. I even seem to know what homework assignments we'll be getting, what we'll be learning, and the exact way the teacher will present it. And it doesn't stop there. When I think about someone, they'll suddenly appear online or text me. If I think about rain, it starts to rain. It's reached a point where I even dream about the specific questions I'll get in exams. The first time it happened, I thought it was just stress, but then I opened the paper, and there was the exact question from my dream. Even though it sounds kind of amazing, it's starting to get annoying, especially when it ruins surprises. I've never been particularly gifted when it comes to sensing anything supernatural. I'm not even sure how much I believe in it, but I do have family members who are far more in tune with psychic experiences. Their stories, along with a couple of odd experiences I've had myself, make it hard to dismiss the possibility entirely. We move around quite a bit due to my husband's military career, and for the most part, the houses we've lived in have been quiet, without anything unusual happening. However, 2 or 3 places have made me wonder. The most remarkable experience was what I shared in my story, Gift from a Ghost. While the easiest to brush off would be a house with a creaky old barn-turned garage that my kids swore was haunted by footsteps and presence. Frankly, it could have been the building itself making those sounds. Somewhere in between these experiences was a house we owned in Connecticut. Despite being only about 15 years old when we bought it, it needed extensive work on the inside, likely because the previous occupants were dealing with some serious family issues. From what we were told, there had been a teenage girl with emotional problems, and the parents were in the middle of a messy divorce. Tensions had clearly left their mark, as several walls had holes that looked like they'd been punched through. It wasn't hard to imagine an atmosphere of anger and sadness hanging around that house. We poured a lot of work into the place, and in the end, it looked fantastic. At that time, my younger son was still living at home, though he never noticed anything strange. But my daughter, who was in college and only home for the occasional weekend, always felt uneasy in her room. It was the same room that had belonged to the teenage girl before us. Sometimes, she felt as if someone had sat or even lain down beside her on the bed. There was nothing particularly threatening about it, just a heavy, lonely presence. I usually brushed it off, telling her it was probably a half-dream or just her imagination, but she remained convinced. I suppose imagination can be a powerful thing, especially if something seems to recur. I might have continued dismissing it if it hadn't been for what happened when my cousin came to visit while my daughter was away at school. I put her up in my daughter's room without mentioning my daughter's experiences, as they hadn't seemed significant enough to bring up. But the next morning, my cousin looked pale and admitted she'd been terrified in the night. She described the same sensation of someone sitting down on the bed beside her and then curling up close, even feeling a soft breath on the back of her neck. She said it wasn't threatening, just lonely, like it was looking for comfort. Still, she was too shaken to sleep there alone again and insisted on having our dog in the room with her after that. The dog didn't mind, thrilled to be on a bed instead of in her crate, and the rest of my cousin's stay went smoothly. My daughter, when she heard about it, was relieved that her feelings were validated, though it didn't make her want to sleep there anymore. Not long after, she moved in with friends, and I don't think she ever spent another night in that room. We ended up moving about 4 or 5 months later. As for my own experiences in that house, there was just one that left me puzzled. One morning, while I was home alone, the phone in the bedroom rang. I crossed the room to answer it, but as I got within about 3 feet of it, the receiver suddenly lifted about an inch, jiggled a bit, and then dropped back down, cutting off the call. A moment later, it rang again, and when I answered, it was my husband, asking why I'd cut him off. He still thinks I fumbled the phone, but I hadn't even been close enough to touch it. I was a good arm's length from the phone, the bed, the nightstand, anything that might have bumped it. I saw the receiver lift, jiggle, and fall without anyone or anything physically touching it. To this day, I have no explanation for what I saw. I'm a 20-year-old with a long-standing curiosity about the paranormal. Though I've always respected the supernatural, I wouldn't call myself gifted in sensing it. I believe in God, and I've even experienced being slain in the spirit while serving as an altar server in a Catholic church. I've always been careful to approach the paranormal with caution, never tried an Ouija board, though I do own a pendulum I occasionally used in high school, always after saying a prayer for protection. I often have lucid dreams, and sometimes, events from my dreams unfold in real life, whether days or months later. I've lived in the same house my entire life here in Connecticut. The house itself is only about 60 or 70 years old, and with an electrical plant right behind my yard, I've sometimes wondered if that could be feeding some of the strange experiences I've had since I was young. One of my earliest memories involves seeing shadowy figures in my parents' bedroom. As a child, whenever I felt uneasy, I would go to their room in the middle of the night and crawl into bed with them. I'd peek over the foot of the bed and watch shadowy silhouettes of animals, porcupines and others, slowly move along the floor, heading from one corner of the room toward the closet. Strangely, I wasn't afraid of these shadows back then. They intrigued me more than anything. I would sometimes even stand in their way to see if they'd react. When I was in middle school, a bout of insomnia hit me, and I started feeling an intense discomfort in my room and closet, as though I were being watched. The shadows reappeared in my parents' room when I would occasionally sleep on their floor, but this time, they felt different, more unsettling. In my own room, I'd sometimes see a figure standing outside in the yard, staring at me with illuminated eyes, and the sensation of being watched became overwhelming. It began affecting my sleep so much that I'd sometimes skip school just to catch up on rest. In high school, my experiences became more sporadic but intense. I'd hear unexplained noises, bangs, whispers, and see moving shadows. Once, when I was home alone, a loud bang came from my brother's room, which was separated from mine by a curtain and some furniture. Startled, I went to check for any damage but instead felt an intense cold, and the sense that something very angry was watching me. As I turned to leave, I felt an invisible force pushing me out of the room. I tried to resist, putting my weight on my heels, But it was no use. I was practically shoved out of the room. Eventually, my parents decided my brother and I needed separate rooms, and I was moved into their old bedroom. After we painted it, the closet door was removed because it wouldn't stay in its frame, leaving the closet wide open. That was when I started seeing shadow figures lingering in the frame of the closet. Figures that looked eerily similar to the ones I'd seen outside. The shadow animals reappeared too, crawling around in the daylight. The feelings of being watched returned, more intense than ever. This was around the time I got a pendulum, a quartz one I handled cautiously, always after praying for protection. I wanted to know more about the shadows I'd seen my whole life, especially the one figure I'd come to think of as a man. Using the pendulum, I believed he told me his name was Tyler. I wasn't entirely sure about the pendulum's reliability, but I did get the sense he was observing me, perhaps waiting for something. Although he gave me an eerie feeling, I didn't think he had harmful intentions. Eventually, I started losing sleep again, and my parents gave me a makeshift door to cover the closet at night. While the eerie feeling never fully left, it was easier to sleep with the closet hidden from view. When I went to college in Pennsylvania, I thought I'd left these experiences behind. My school had its own ghost stories, but the shadowy figure continued to appear, now standing in the doorway of my dorm room. Even when I changed dorms or stayed over at my boyfriend's place, the figure would be there, watching from the doorway. I assumed it was the same figure from home, though I couldn't be sure. Despite his unsettling presence, he didn't scare me as much as he once had. Returning home for vacations, I found that the shadow in my closet and the shadowy animals around my room hadn't left. Though he still unsettles me, I've come to accept his presence. I wonder what he's doing here, whether he's behind the strange phenomena I sometimes experience, and how he's connected to the animals I still see crawling around the room. It's as if he's always been there, waiting, though for what, I still don't know. My experience happened the night after I reconnected with my younger sister, Amy. At the time, she was 12 and I was 16. We'd never been very close for various reasons, and from ages 6 to 14, I'd treated her poorly. Insults, pushes, and the occasional hit. Though Amy was always forgiving, we hadn't shared a real conversation in years. That night, we were out to dinner with our grandparents and our youngest sister, who was 10. Amy and I sat together at a two-person table, separate from the others. As we talked, the conversation turned to her beliefs and experiences with the paranormal. Surprisingly, we connected when she described seeing something in our home that mirrored an experience I'd had in a different place and time. She brought it up without knowing I'd experienced something similar. Through our conversation, I realized she was more sensitive to these things than I was, or even wanted to be. To keep talking, we went for a walk around the block as night fell. We were staying at our grandmother's house, so we knew we'd have plenty of time together. As we walked past a yard bordered by a crisp white plastic fence, we suddenly felt a strange, creeping fear. For a few steps, we pretended not to feel it, but then Amy broke the silence, admitting her discomfort. I confirmed I felt it too, and we sprinted the rest of the way home. Once we were back on the front porch, we continued the conversation. Amy told me she felt something bad swirling around us, like it was waiting for something. I brushed it off, unwilling to accept the fear. That night, Amy went to bed, but I stayed awake in the recliner in the living room, reading and watching videos on my laptop. The uneasy feeling lingered. Between 10 o'clock and midnight, I went to my room and put on my MP3 player. For the next 3 hours, I listened to The Dragon Factory by Jonathan Mayberry. While the book's themes were unsettling, I wouldn't call it horror. When the audiobook ended, I tried to sleep, though I felt unexplainably afraid. I lay on my side, listening to odd sounds coming from the hallway, everyday noises like a dog moving around or people shifting. But my grandmother didn't own a dog, and everyone else in the house was asleep. I prayed to Jesus for protection, hoping the fear would go away, but it didn't. As I lay there, a strange, immobilizing sensation spread through my body. It started in my chest and moved up to my neck and down through my stomach, stopping around my navel. It felt as if a heavy, tingling blanket was draped over me, pressing down evenly from head to toe. I tried kicking my legs, and the sensation vanished, but the fear remained. I prayed more. Then the sensation returned, stronger this time. It was a lightheaded, thick feeling spreading from the top of my head to my fingers and torso. I'm not entirely sure, but I think I struggled to draw a breath for a moment. Overcome with fear, I threw off the covers, and as soon as I moved, the sensation disappeared. I ran to Amy's room and spent the rest of the night sleeping beside her. Since that night, something curious has happened. Whenever I feel scared or alarmed, I experience the same tingling sensation in my chest, though without the heavy pressure. This happened about 3 times since, usually when I've let myself dwell too much on frightening topics. It's led me to believe that the sensation may have been a physical response to fear or stress. But at the same time, I wonder if it could have been something more, especially given Amy's shared feeling of fear at the fence and the noises I heard afterward. I sometimes think we might have brought something back with us from that yard. Months later, I described the experience to someone interested in the paranormal, who suggested it might have been a banshee. But after reading about banshees, the description didn't seem to match. So I'm left wondering, was it an actual encounter? Something watching us? And why didn't God make it go away when I asked? This story might sound utterly ridiculous, but it's completely true, and honestly, I'm really scared. I'm 16 and live in a relatively new house, about 40 years old, which is young for my town, where most houses are over 100 years old. But there's something deeply wrong with this house. It just feels unsettled. Whenever I enter, there's this acrid smell, like rotting flesh. My parents only mention it when I walk into the house, as if the smell appears with me. This only started within the past year, so at first, I thought maybe my cats had brought something in. But they're indoor cats, and it's strange that the smell only appears when I'm home. The entire house seems to turn darker and heavier when I'm there. Lately, I've been losing sleep, getting about 4 hours a night on average. There's a mirror in my room that a medium once told me acts as a portal. I've always felt uneasy about that part of my room, but I can't remove the mirror since it's built into the wall. I wish I could, especially since I've started waking up with scratches. One night, I made sure to eliminate anything that could cause them and even said a protection prayer to Gaia before bed. Still, I woke up with 3 deep scratches across my back and had nightmares all night long. Here's where it gets strange. I've been sensitive to spirits my whole life. One day, I went to my therapist in a quiet, reflective mood, and she wanted to use a machine designed to put you into a trance to explore your subconscious. At first, all I saw was a twisted, scary-looking tree with a lonely little kid on a swing beneath it. But then, a memory surfaced from when I was about 2 years old. I thought it couldn't be real, but when I described the details of my old bedroom to my mom, she was almost in tears. In this memory, I'd woken up one night and looked into a mirror attached to a bureau. Standing behind me was a skeleton-like entity, surrounded by a thick, black mist. I started screaming, and my mom rushed into the room, scooping me up to comfort me. The skeleton disappeared and never appeared in that house again. I thought I could move past it since that happened in a house we moved out of 14 years ago. But when I got home from therapy, my older brother was really upset. He's 5 years older than me, so he'd lived in that old house longer. I hadn't mentioned anything about the therapy session, but he seemed really agitated. When I asked him what was wrong, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "It was around Christmas Eve or something, back in the old house. You were about 2 right before we moved. I was sharing a bed with Titi, our great aunt, and it was the middle of the night. I woke up because I had this nightmare about something hurting you. Then I saw a skeleton peering into the room. I screamed, Titi woke up, and it disappeared. But when I tried going back to sleep, I woke up again to this rancid smell. The skeleton was only 3 feet away from me. I was never so terrified in my life. My dad had his first strange experience about a year after we moved in. He was cleaning the garage, which has a side door, when he noticed 2 women walking past it. He thought it was my mom and our neighbor, so he went outside to talk to them. But when he got out there, no one was around. He even walked all the way around the house and still didn't find anyone. Another time, while watching TV with my oldest sister, the garage door handle suddenly began shaking uncontrollably. The garage is attached to the house, so my dad went to check, thinking someone might be there. He found no one, and it wasn't a windy day that might have explained it. My mom had her own eerie encounter in the barn while cleaning the horse stalls. She felt like someone was watching her, so she looked up and saw a black shadow walk past the door. When she went to check, no one was there. About an hour later, she received a call saying her uncle had passed away, and she believes the shadow was him saying goodbye. My oldest sister experienced a lot. She would often see figures walk past her door at night. One night, she turned off the light downstairs before bed, but when she came out of the bathroom, it was back on, though everyone was asleep. Another night, she heard me having a full conversation with someone, but when she checked my room, I was sound asleep. Once, she was in the hallway talking to my sister's now ex-boyfriend, and his cross pendant fell off the chain without breaking. They were both puzzled, as there was no visible damage. She also had an experience in the barn while cleaning stalls with another sister. They heard one of the heavy stall doors open and shut, something far too heavy for the wind to move. My second oldest sister had a strange encounter while using the computer. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a small white ball dart across the living room floor. She went to see what it was, but nothing was there. My youngest sister was watching a recording of Ghost Adventures when, without any warning, the show exited and switched to a live Catholic Mass. The remote was on her lap, untouched, and we couldn't explain why it switched on its own. My fiancé, who was staying over, had his own experiences. Once, he was heading upstairs to bed and heard voices coming from downstairs, though no one was there. Another time, he was outside feeling sick. He'd had gastric bypass surgery a year prior, and saw a man with a long beard sitting by the garage side door. He assumed it was one of my dad's friends and looked away briefly, but when he looked back, the man was gone without a trace. Now, to my own experiences. One day, I was home alone, sweeping for my mom, when I heard two girls giggling. I went to check but found no one. Another time, I woke up at night to use the bathroom and heard what sounded like a TV or loud conversation coming from downstairs. I checked my sister's and mom's rooms, but none of their TVs were on, and there was no one downstairs. At my fiancé's house, I had a couple of strange encounters involving a cat that wasn't there. Once, I felt the sensation of a cat clawing on the blanket, but when I looked, there were no cats in sight. Another time, I heard a bell jingle next to me, even though my fiancé's cat doesn't wear a bell, and the sound wasn't coming from outside. We couldn't explain it. Lastly, one experience my entire family has witnessed. We have a room upstairs that's split into two connected spaces. When any of us goes upstairs and glances into that room, we can sometimes see a man standing in the doorway to the second room. It was June of 2003, and my family was in turmoil following the tragic loss of my cousin during the 2001 World Trade Center attacks. Since then, my Uncle Jim had spiraled into alcoholism. Every night, he followed the same routine. Returning home from his girlfriend's house, grabbing a six-pack of Bud Light from the fridge, downing it in about 15 minutes, and then heading out to the bar. He was deeply depressed and angry, and it worried me. One Wednesday evening, I went over to his house and found him surprisingly far gone. More drunk than usual, his breath heavy with the stench of beer and his teeth a bright yellow. Concerned, I told him that his drinking was excessive and that he should consider rehabilitation. Uncle Jim was always volatile, especially when intoxicated, and he didn't take kindly to the suggestion of rehab. The next thing I knew, he hit me with a chair and threw me out the front door, screaming in a rage I couldn't comprehend at the time. "What the hell do you know, huh?" he yelled before getting into his car and driving off. I felt powerless to stop him. Around 3 a.m., my grandmother woke me, urgently telling me we had to go to the hospital. Uncle Jim had been in a serious car accident, and by the time we arrived, he was pronounced dead. I was in shock, unsure of how to process it all. About 3 weeks later, I was painting a picture of my girlfriend, Cindy, for her birthday. She was the most beautiful and sweet girl I had ever met, and I wanted the painting to be special. After a break for lunch at Subway, I returned to find my entire canvas setup knocked over, ripped into 3 pieces. I was a skeptic at heart and thought maybe the wind had done it, but all the windows were closed and locked. Confused, I cleaned up the mess and went back to work. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I came home to find Cindy waiting for me. She seemed anxious, complaining about hearing footsteps and strange noises coming from upstairs. I grabbed my 20-gauge shotgun and a flashlight, heading upstairs to investigate. All I found was an empty chair, but the feeling in the air was unsettling. I shut and locked the attic door, climbed back into bed with Cindy, hoping to get some sleep. Just about 3 hours later, I was jolted awake by a screech followed by heavy stomping on the stairs. I bolted upright to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom, charged at me with alarming speed. A chilling cold washed over me, feeling as if ice had been poured onto my skin. Moments later, I felt a burning sensation on my chest. I quickly flicked on the lights, and just like that, it was over. As the light illuminated the room, I lifted my shirt to find scratch marks traced in the shape of the name Jim across my chest. It dawned on me that my Uncle Jim had returned, perhaps to torment me for suggesting rehab. In the years since that night, these experiences haven't stopped. I've grown used to his presence, and strangely, I don't mind it anymore. I've become a firm believer in the paranormal and often seek out others who have had similar encounters. Jim never attacked me or Cindy again, but he does have a habit of ripping my paintings, and sometimes I'll hear him making snacks late at night. There are even times when he seems to just disappear. Where he goes during those moments, I can only wonder. I'm a 15-year-old girl living in a very old house with my parents, brothers, and grandmother. My grandpa used to live with us too, but he passed away about 2 years ago. It's important to mention that my grandma has her own apartment attached to our house, connected through a door in the living room. My first notable paranormal experience happened when I was much younger, and it has stuck with me since. I don't remember the details, but I've been told that when I was about 2 years old, I would often talk to my great-grandma, who had suffered a stroke. Though she was alive, she was not mentally present. According to my mom, I would babble away in my room as if having a real conversation, always referring to her as Grandma. One specific instance my mom recalls is when I told her we had to come up here because Grandma is afraid of the dog. This struck my mom as odd, as my dad's grandmother had always been terrified of dogs, a fact he'd never mentioned to anyone. Fast forward to more recent years. I've lived in this old house my entire life. It's only about 60 or 70 years old, but the atmosphere can feel unsettling. I've always sensed a presence, especially in my room, where I often felt watched. This was particularly evident when I moved into a room with a mirror that some say acts like a portal. During my middle school years, I dealt with a severe bout of insomnia. I would often feel uncomfortable in my own space, with shadows lurking in the corners and a sense of being watched. There were times I saw shadowy figures outside my window and felt a strange pressure around me, but I brushed it off as part of my imagination, until I experienced something more direct. One night, I woke up to hear a faint scratching sound near my window, and when I looked outside, I saw nothing but a clear sky. My dog, who often slept with me, started barking furiously at the door leading to my grandma's apartment. He seemed anxious, as if sensing something I couldn't. It wasn't until a particularly strange series of events during Halloween weekend in 2013 that I really began to question what was happening around me. After a visit to a therapist where I described my experiences, I found myself flooded with memories, including one from when I was 2, where I'd seen a skeleton-like entity in a mirror. Back in the present, I spent a weekend house-sitting for family friends. On Halloween night, I went to bed around 10 p.m., but was awakened by strange sounds. Just as I was settling down again, I saw a translucent beagle appear on my bed, barking toward the hallway. It wasn't their dog. They didn't even have one. Startled, I shouted, "Who's there?" The beagle vanished, and suddenly I felt the familiar immobilizing weight on my chest, as if something was pinning me down. Then, the most terrifying thing happened. A face resembling a jack-o'-lantern with jagged teeth appeared right in front of me, roaring in anger. I screamed, and it disappeared. I spent the rest of the night shaken, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. A few days later, I encountered another odd sensation. A hand gently sliding up my thigh and playing with my hair. I couldn't move or open my eyes, but the touch felt oddly comforting. When it vanished, I was left with a mixture of confusion and fear. In the days following, I began to research what I had experienced. I learned about incubuses, male demons said to visit people in their sleep, often with sinister intentions. The first time I had felt the presence of the ghost, I thought it was simply benign, but as I delved deeper into the paranormal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark might be lurking nearby. One night, while reading about incubuses online, I exclaimed in shock, "A sex demon?" Just then, my computer shut off, and I felt a hand on the back of my neck, a strangely calming touch. But as I recalled the ominous message I had received earlier, I asked, "Are you the evil one?" The feeling immediately shifted to one of anger and pressure, immobilizing me again until a loud bang on my bedroom door broke the spell. For days passed since that incident. I was anxious knowing that there were potentially two incubuses in my house, one claiming to be good and the other clearly malevolent. The comforting spirit had shown itself to me, but the good one seemed to keep the evil one at bay, at least for now. I sought answers, wanting to understand why they were drawn to me and what they wanted. Later, I spoke to someone who specialized in the paranormal. They told me I might be a doorway or a conduit for spirits, which was both intriguing and terrifying. They warned me to be cautious in the future. Not all spirits are benign, and I needed to protect myself. I've since remained on guard, trying to discern the intentions of the spirits around me while grappling with the unsettling reality of my experiences. My name is Greg, and I grew up in northern Connecticut. At 16, I want to share my story, though it sounds utterly ridiculous. It's completely true, and I'm still trying to process it. Throughout high school, I was a devoted atheist. My circle of friends included Aaron, who was deeply into the occult, horror movies, and witchcraft. My close friend Jennifer, who is now my wife. Edward, another atheist, and Peter, who was from Germany and a devout Catholic. We often spent our nights out until 3 a.m. One evening, we decided to play capture the flag at night, which seemed like a great idea at the time. We were wrong. We split into teams, Aaron and I against Peter, Edward, and Jennifer. Our hometown had plenty of wide-open spaces and woods, so I was familiar with the area. After about 45 minutes of gameplay, Aaron leaned over and asked, "Greg, where does that trail go?" He pointed to a trail that led to a dilapidated house we called the garbage hut, made up of sheet metal and cans. "That trail? It goes down to the garbage hut," I replied. "It's the longest trail in town." I felt uneasy about it, sensing something off, but after some convincing from Aaron, I reluctantly followed him down the path. As we approached the garbage hut, a chill ran down my spine. I zipped up my hoodie and stood, staring at the wreck of the house. I told Aaron that the man who lived there was in jail for tax evasion, but I felt uneasy as he opened the door. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running in after him. The moment I stepped inside, nausea washed over me. The air was thick with the stench of rotting meat and excrement. We explored the kitchen and living room, but when we heard a deep growl, we decided it was time to leave. Aaron pocketed a beautifully detailed pocket watch he found, and as we sprinted down the trail, I could have sworn I heard a large dog galloping behind us. Once we reached safety, we separated and called it a night. I stayed up watching TV, trying to distract myself from the unsettling experience. The next day, Aaron invited us over to his house for the night. I was hesitant, feeling morally conflicted about the pocket watch he'd taken, but I went. From the moment I arrived, the atmosphere felt icy, which was comforting to know others felt it too. Aaron began showing off the pocket watch, and the more he waved it around, the more uncomfortable we became. Edward complained of a stomach ache and ended up violently vomiting most of the night. Leaving around 11 p.m. Peter had church in the morning, so he left shortly after. Jennifer and I remained. Around 1 a.m., we heard a tapping at the window. Aaron went to check, thinking it was his brother returning from the bar, but found nothing. Tired, Jennifer decided to drive home. Before she left, she asked if I wanted a ride. I don't know why, but I said, "No, I think I should stay." She looked uneasy but left anyway. At 3:30 a.m., Aaron was completely out of it. I turned to him and asked, "Dude, you tired?" He opened his eyes and replied in a firm voice, "No, all my questions were met with short answers or a blank stare." He got up slowly and opened the door to the basement, and I followed him down. What I saw next is burned into my memory. Halfway down the stairs, Aaron turned around, and I asked, "Why did you take so long to grab the beers?" As I spoke, his pupils vanished, and he smiled. His tongue extended unnaturally long. Shadows danced at the bottom of the steps, and suddenly, I heard screaming and doors slamming. I broke out in a sweat and ran out of the house, sprinting until I could hardly breathe. I reached my home and woke my dad, telling him everything. He nodded and said, "Greg, you need to go back to church. You need to find God again." After that night, I never missed a Sunday and started praying almost daily. A few days later, Edward and Peter mentioned they returned to Aaron's house to retrieve Edward's backpack. They found the place completely empty, with no sign of anyone being home. I only saw Aaron a few times after that, but 2 weeks later, his family vanished entirely. I haven't seen him since junior year. I often wonder what happened to him and if he's still alive. Did I really experience all this? Is it possible that he and his family are still out there? I'm Wiccan and practice working with energy and crystals. About 6 months ago, I bought a crystal at a witch shop, intending to use it to enhance my practice. Initially, I struggled to move it with my energy, so I set it aside. However, I soon became obsessed with contacting my spirit guides, feeling a strong urge to connect with them for reasons I couldn't quite explain. One day, I took out my crystal again, and to my surprise, it began to spin immediately. I thought it was my energy causing the movement. When I mentally instructed it to stop or change direction, it would respond. Excited, I showed my brother and mom, who were impressed and thought I was becoming a powerful witch. It didn't occur to me that my obsession and the crystal's movement were connected until last night. I was watching the crystal spin and commanding it when I suddenly realized, I'm only 14. There's no way I could be powerful enough to move it with my mind. So, I decided to ask it directly, if my spirit guide is the one moving this crystal, then stop. It stopped. And move the other way. It did. I was amazed and started to ask it more questions. I instructed it to move clockwise for yes and counterclockwise for no. Curiosity drove me to ask if it was here to help me, and the answer was no. I then asked if it was here to protect or guide me, and again the answer was no. Confused, I wondered why it was even present. While it couldn't answer that question, it left me with a growing sense of intrigue. As a side note, I was asking everything in my head by this point. I went upstairs to my room, wanting to explore this connection further. I asked if it would communicate with me through my Ouija board, but it said no. Then, I asked what its name started with. No. B no. C no. D yes. Its name began with a D. I thought it might be easier to figure out if it was male or female first, and it confirmed it was male. After a lot of patience, which I found surprising, I pieced together its name. The letters it provided were Kfleppermux. I thought, there's no way I can pronounce that. So, I took the first letter, the sixth letter, and the last letter to form Dex. Now I had a name. I continued asking yes or no questions. I asked if Dex was here to warn me, and he said yes. Then I inquired if he was there to warn me about my future, and he said no. When I asked about my past, he said yes. This puzzled me. The past is done, so how could he warn me about it? I asked if he wanted to guide me to change something from my past, and he affirmed that he did. I began to wonder if spirits perceive time differently. If time is meaningless to them, then perhaps my past encompasses my entire life, including events yet to unfold. I asked Dex if I could take a quick break, and he began spinning the crystal violently, replying with a loud no. That made me nervous. Something felt off. Suddenly, a huge bug flew at my face. I screamed, threw the crystal, jumped off the couch, and ran for the door. I paused at the threshold and looked back, only to be hit by a wave of dread in my stomach. I searched my room for hours but couldn't find the crystal or the bug. It felt like something was preventing me from communicating with Dex, and I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. Now, I'm left wondering what to do. Without the crystal and knowing that Dex won't use a Ouija board, how can I reach out to him? He seemed to be here for a reason, and I have this overwhelming feeling that he has something important to tell me. The dread and anticipation weigh heavily on me. It's been several years since the incidents my sister and I experienced, and I believe there are countless similar stories out there that just haven't been told. We encountered what I truly believe to be paranormal events a total of 6 times, all within the span of a year. Even though I've always been skeptical about the supernatural, I stand by my experiences, and my sister will too, until the day we die. The first incident happened to my sister. She woke up one night to see our father standing at her dresser in the shared bedroom we had with our older brother. Thinking nothing of it, she called out to him, "Dad!" At that moment, he dropped a small object, turned toward her, startled by her voice, and slipped out the door, disappearing as he passed through the doorframe. Confused, she hurried to my parents' room, waking my mother. "Where's Dad?" she asked. My mother replied that he had left for work hours earlier. Not long after, my sister woke up again, this time to see a little girl sitting at the foot of her bed, staring at her. Too frightened to move, she remained there until morning. Naturally, when she shared this with our parents, they dismissed it. After all, a little girl's story only goes so far with skeptical adults. A month later, she had another encounter. This time, she awoke to see a woman standing in the middle of our room, gazing at her curiously. Once again, she stayed in bed, too frightened to confront the apparition. Many days later, I had my own experience. I woke up to see what I thought was my father standing a few steps into our room. "Dad?" I said, but without making a sound, he turned and left. I sat up, continuing to call out to him, but he never returned. I later realized that it wasn't unusual for him to work late into the night, so he might not have even been home at that hour. The next night, I woke up to find my sister sitting on my older brother's bed, which was just a few feet away from hers, staring intently at her own bed. Confused, I quietly called out to her and got out of bed to sit beside her. But when I settled down, I saw that she was sound asleep in her bed. Alarmed, I turned back to where I thought she had been, only to see the figure I had thought was her now sitting on the ground against the wall, facing me. Terrified, I went back to my bed, grappling with what I had just witnessed. The following night, my sister again reported seeing a little girl sitting in a chair next to her keyboard, just a few feet away from her bed. After that, my mom moved the keyboard out of our room, and we didn't have any more experiences in that house, at least not until one early summer morning. My mother was resting on the couch when the TV suddenly turned on. Confused and not in the mood for television, she got up to turn it off. As soon as she switched off the TV, the fan she had pointed to also shut down. She walked over to the fan and turned it back on, only for the TV to spring back to life again. Spooked by the unusual occurrences, she checked on her sleeping children before heading back to sleep. My sister believes that the spirits we saw had no connection to our family and were dressed in old-fashioned clothes. The little girl and the woman were distinct in her memory. On the other hand, I initially thought both the man and the little girl resembled family members. These experiences left a profound mark on us, raising questions about the nature of what we encountered and how it might connect to the past of our home. My paternal grandfather was as cantankerous and ornery as they come, but fiercely loyal to his family and friends. He built the house my dad was born and raised in, always had grease under his nails from calibrating heavy machinery, and drove a 1966 Chevelle that most of my high school friends would have done anything to own. He was still driving it up until he passed in 1999. Grandpa wasn't the type to take any guff. If someone started an argument with him, they'd better be ready to lose. He was tough, stubborn, and rarely backed down. Even into my 30s, he'd still slip me $1, give a wink, and say, "Don't spend it all in one place." In Grandpa's world, people were either dumbasses or smartasses, and he never hesitated to let you know which one you were. One year in the 80s, Grandpa came for a visit. I was around 16 or 17, and, like any teenager of the time, I had spent half an hour in the bathroom with a can of Aqua Net hairspray, perfecting that gravity-defying look. Grandpa took one look at my hair and exclaimed, "Jennifer, what the hell did you do to your hair? Did you comb it with a pitchfork?" Smug as only a teenager could be, I shrugged and replied, "I'm just a product of the music I listen to, Grandpa." He shook his head, muttering smartass as he walked away. On another occasion, our family went to Burlington, Vermont, for a weekend. Grandpa was driving 30 miles per hour in his old Chevelle down a 55 mph road, taking his sweet time. We stopped at a general store, and I must have taken too long inside because Grandpa started leaning on the horn and shouting for me to come out. After turning about 6 shades of red and paying for my Coke, I rushed back to the car, only to hear Grandpa beep the horn one last time as I reached the door. "Get in the car, dumbass," he shouted, making me wish I could hide under a rock. Right before the new millennium, my sister called to tell me that Grandpa had passed. I was sad, though in truth we hadn't been particularly close. But the day before we left for his funeral in Connecticut, I had an experience that felt almost as if he were there with me. As I walked through my apartment, I suddenly smelled him, grease, mixed with the smells of his home, of cooking and cleaning. If I had shut my eyes, I could have sworn he was standing right there. I started to cry, apologizing. "I'm sorry, Grandpa, for not visiting more." After a few moments, the smell faded, leaving me feeling an odd sense of both sadness and comfort. The night before the funeral, I learned more about my grandfather's softer side. Despite his rough exterior, he had been anonymously helping an underprivileged family financially for years. He'd quietly supported people down on their luck, never bragging or seeking credit. I realized that his tough love, harsh words and all was his way of showing care, shaped by his own tough upbringing. On the morning of the funeral, while waiting my turn for the shower, I decided to explore Grandpa's basement and check out his old workbench. All over the workbench, in his handwriting, were quotes he'd scribbled over the years with a lead pencil. As I read through them, I started to feel nostalgic. One note, dated 1960, was written by my aunt, his youngest child. While I was lost in thought, a block of wood suddenly dislodged itself from the bench and landed squarely on my foot. The pain was sharp, and as I reached down to rub my foot, I noticed a quote that had been hidden behind the block. "Your looks may be fading, but you'll always be a dumbass. Nobody likes a dumbass." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even in death, Grandpa had somehow managed to get the last word.